Picture a crate. A single wooden crate the size of a coffin nailed shut, sweating in the hold of a ship for 6 weeks. Now fill it with 300 lemons, half of them already going soft and brown at the stem, and tell a boy of 14 that if even a tenth of them rot before they reach London, he will be the one who answers for it, not the captain, not the merchant who paid for the voyage. Him. A boy with cracked knuckles and a candle stub for a wage. That's the lemon trade in Tudor England. Glamorous in the account books, disgusting up close. A trade where you could be hauling a fortune in citrus up a gangplank at dawn and watching half of that fortune turn to mush by supper. We're going back there tonight. Not as tourists admiring a bowl of fruit on some painted Dutch canvas. We're living it. One day, one boy, one impossible cargo. Everything he would have smelled, touched, dropped, saved, and very nearly died for. So, I make these history stories, and I genuinely don't know if you fall asleep to them or if you're the kind of person who finds comfort in hearing about fruit rot and dockside violence at 2 a.m. Either way works for me. Subscribe if you feel like it. Get comfortable. Here we go. The rope is rough enough to take skin off your palms if you let it slide even an inch, and right now it is sliding. You feel it before you understand it. A thin, hot line across your palm, the rope biting through the layer of calluses you built all winter, and somewhere above you a man is shouting your name like it's a curse word. Hold it! Hold it, you little! Hold it! You hold it. Your whole body becomes the holding. Shoulders locked, knees bent, boots skidding for half a second on wet planking before they catch. The crate swinging above your head doesn't care that your hands are screaming. It just hangs there, twisting slowly on its rope. 300 pounds of citrus from somewhere with sun in it, suspended over a stretch of black river water that would swallow it without a ripple if you let go. You don't let go. The rope cuts deeper. You taste copper at the back of your throat from the effort, from holding your breath without meaning to. Somewhere behind you, gulls are screaming at each other over a dead fish. And somewhere below you, the Thames is doing what it always does at low tide, exposing a black, glistening bank of mud studded with broken pottery, dead eels, and things you've stopped trying to identify. Now, the man bellows, and you let the rope run, controlled, your palms burning, and the crate drops the last 4 feet onto the quay with a thud that you feel in your back teeth. It doesn't break. You exhale so hard it comes out as a laugh, which is the wrong reaction. Because the man, Master Pelham, fruiterer of Thames Street, your master for the last year and 3 months, is already crouching beside the crate, prying at the lid with a short iron bar, his face arranged into the particular scowl he saves for moments when money's on the line. The nails groan, the lid lifts, and the smell hits you. It's not one smell. Lemons never are, not in bulk, not after 6 weeks at sea. There's the sharp green bite of the rind, the kind that makes the inside of your nose prickle. Underneath that, something sweeter and wronger. The smell of the dozen or so fruits near the bottom that gave up somewhere around the Bay of Biscay and have been quietly liquefying ever since. And under all of it, the ship smell that's soaked into the wood itself, tar, bilge water, the salt and rot breath of a hold that's carried fish and wine and men who are seasick for most of the crossing. Master Pelham doesn't flinch at any of it. He's smelled worse. He digs both hands into the crate up to the wrist like a man checking a wound and starts sorting. Good lemon, bad lemon, good, good, bad. That one gets flung, hard, off the quay and into the mud, where it vanishes with a wet smack that the gulls investigate immediately. Good. good, bad. Count, he says, not looking at you. You count. Your hands are still shaking slightly from the rope, and you have to press your thumb hard against your palm to feel the sting properly, to use the pain to keep you steady the way you've learned to do. 211 good, sir. 89 spoiled or spoiling. Master Pelham's jaw works like he's chewing something bitter. 89 out of 300. Nearly a third of the crate gone, and this is only the first of 11 crates still sitting in the hold of the Margaret Rose, waiting for hands, your hands, to bring them up one at a time before the tide turns and the ship has to move off to make room at the wharf. Could be worse, he says, which from him counts as comfort. It could be. You've heard the stories. A whole shipment lost to a storm off Land's End 2 summers back, sour with seawater and useless, the merchant who'd financed the voyage ruined inside a month. Lemons are not like wool or pepper or nails. Lemons die. They die slowly, sweetly in the dark, and there is no amount of careful packing that stops it entirely. You can only slow it down and pray and pay men like you to climb down into ships' holds that smell like the inside of a dead man's boot, looking for the ones that are starting to go before they spread their rot to the ones that aren't. This is the trade you've fallen into. Not wool, not silver, fruit. A fruit that most of London has never tasted and never will, because it costs more per dozen than a labourer earns in a week, and because half of every shipment dies on the way here. But the half that survives is worth more than gold by weight, if you know who to sell it to. And you're about to find out exactly who that is. Your name is Robert Tanner. You're 14 years old, and you came to London 2 years ago from a village near Maidstone, where the only fruit anyone grew was apples, and even those were small and scabbed by autumn. Your father sent you here with a letter of introduction to a cousin of a cousin, and exactly 4 shillings sewn into the lining of your coat, which Master Pelham relieved you of within the first week, as payment toward your keep. You did not know, when you arrived, that you would spend your apprenticeship hauling crates of foreign fruit out of ship holds. You thought fruiterers sold apples and pears and the occasional basket of strawberries in June. You did not know there was a whole secret economy built around fruit that arrives half rotten from places with names like Seville and the Azores, fruit that costs more than a skilled mason's daily wage, fruit that physicians prescribe like medicine because, in a way no one in this city fully understands yet, it is medicine. You learned the word scurvy in your first month. You learned it the hard way, watching a sailor from the Margaret Rose stagger off the gangplank with his gums black and swollen and bleeding around teeth that wobbled in his jaw like loose pegs. He'd been at sea 4 months. Master Pelham took one look at him and sent you running for a dozen lemons on credit, no charge, because, he told you later, gripping your shoulder hard enough to bruise, a sick sailor who dies in your doorway is bad for business, whatever else he is. The sailor lived. You don't know if it was the lemons or just luck. Master Pelham believes it was the lemons, and he is not a sentimental man, so you believe him too. The second crate comes up slower than the first. Your palms are already raw, and the rope feels different now, wetter, heavier, like it's absorbed some of the river's bad temper. You brace your boots against a coil of cable, lean back with your whole weight, and haul in rhythm with 2 other apprentices from neighbouring shops who've been roped in, literally, to help, because no single boy can manage 11 crates alone before the tide turns. Pull, grunts a boy named Davy, older than you, missing the top of one finger to a winch 3 years back. Pull, pull, hold. The crate clears the hold's lip and swings out over open water for one stomach-dropping second before the men on the quay haul it sideways and down, You feel the relief in your spine before your mind catches up to it. Master Pelham is already at this one too, cracking the lid, sorting good from bad. Good. Fewer losses this time. These were packed nearer the top, closer to air, less crushed under the weight of everything above them. 63 good, you call out, after counting twice to be sure. 12 spoiled. Better, he mutters, and something in his shoulders eases by a fraction. The ship's captain, a broad man named Hollis with a face like weathered rope, leans over the rail above you, watching the operation with the particular impatience of someone who gets paid by the day his ship sits idle. You'll want the rest off by noon, he calls down. Tide turns, and I've got a berth to give up to the Bristol coaster. We'll have it, Master Pelham says, not looking up. Then quieter to you. We'll have it if your hands don't fail you. Your hands are failing you a little. The rope has opened 2 blisters into raw patches that sting every time you flex your fingers. But you don't say so. You've learned, in 2 years, that saying so changes nothing except how Master Pelham looks at you afterward. By the 8th crate, your shirt is soaked through with sweat despite the cold March morning, and your arms feel like someone has filled them with wet sand. The smell of citrus and rot has worked its way so deeply into your nose that you've stopped noticing it as a smell at all. It's just the air now, the way the smell of wood smoke stops being smoke once you've lived your whole life beside a hearth. The 9th crate comes up wrong. You hear it before you see it, a crack, sharp and final, like a knuckle breaking. And then the crate is tilting, one corner staving in against the hull as the men hauling it lose their rhythm for half a heartbeat. Lemons spill out through the broken slats, bouncing off the ship's side, dropping into the river one after another, plip, 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 each one a small coin-shaped loss vanishing into brown water. "Christ's wounds!" roars Captain Hollis. And for a moment everyone freezes, because lost cargo means lost money, means someone somewhere is going to be made to answer for it, and nobody wants that someone to be them. Master Pelham's face has gone the colour of old sweet. He says nothing. He simply watches lemons, his lemons paid for in advance, money he borrowed against the shop to afford this shipment, disappear into the Thames one by one, and you watch him watch it, and you understand, in a way you didn't before, exactly how much is riding on every single fruit in every single crate. It is not until the crate is finally hauled level and lowered, dripping and battered, that anyone breathes properly again. 11 lost in the water, Davy says quietly, counting the bobbing shapes still visible near the hull, before the current carries them off. Out of, 40 in that one? 46, Master Pelham says. His voice has gone very flat. 46 paid for. 11 gone to the fish. Get the rest sorted. You get the rest sorted. Your hands shake while you do it, not from cold this time. The last 2 crates come up without incident, as though the morning has spent its bad luck and has none left over. By the time the 11th and final crate sits cracked open on the quay, the sun has climbed high enough to burn off the river mist, and you're standing in a small, sharp-smelling kingdom of wooden crates, damp sawdust, and lemons. Hundreds of them, gleaming dull yellow in the weak light, already beginning, even now, the slow work of dying. Master Pelham straightens up, presses both fists into the small of his back, and surveys the wreckage of his investment with the particular calm of a man doing arithmetic he does not want to do out loud. "Load the cart," he says. "We've a delivery before noon, and half this fruit won't see Thursday." The cart is old, and one wheel pulls slightly to the left, so that loading it is a careful business of weighting the right side heavier to compensate. You and Davy work in silence, lifting crates two-handed, your blistered palms screaming every time wood meets wood. Master Pelham counts under his breath as each crate goes up, recalculating, the way a man recounts coins he already knows are short. 284 good lemons survived the crossing and the unloading out of 330 paid for. 46 lost to rot. 11 gone to the river. It is not a disaster. It is also not nothing, and you can see the shape of the disaster it nearly became sitting in the lines around Master Pelham's mouth. "Up you get," he says, once the cart is loaded and lashed with the rope that bites into the wood the same way the hoist rope bit into your hands an hour ago. "We're for Thames Street first, then the Gresham's house. Then I want you at Apothecary Webb's before the bells ring too." You climb up beside the crates, careful not to lean your weight against the slats, and Master Pelham takes the donkey's lead rope and starts walking, and the cart lurches forward into the chaos of Billingsgate at the height of the morning market. Nobody warns you, your first year in London, what the markets actually sound like. Nobody can. You have to stand in the middle of it to understand. Billingsgate at mid-morning is several hundred people trying to occupy the same patch of mud at once, each one shouting louder than the person beside them on the theory that volume is a kind of currency. Fishwives with baskets balanced on their heads scream the price of mackerel like it's an insult aimed at someone personally. A man with a handcart of eels, live ones writhing in a barrel of river water, bellows that they're fresh, though you happen to know he caught half of them yesterday evening and the other half this morning, and an eel does not improve with age any more than a lemon does. The cartwheels grind through mud the consistency of porridge, mixed with fish scales and rotting cabbage leaves, and the occasional dead rat that nobody has bothered to remove. The smell down here is its own violent argument, fish guts, brine, wood smoke from a dozen braziers keeping oyster sellers' hands warm, and underneath it the sweet rot of vegetable waste trodden into the mud by 10,000 boots since dawn. A woman shoves past you carrying a basket of crabs that pinch and scrabble against the wicker, muttering something uncomplimentary about boys who block the path with carts. You pull the donkey's lead a half step to the side, and a costermonger's boy your own age darts past pushing a barrow of turnips, with the careless speed of someone who has done this every day of his life and expects everyone else to simply get out of his way. Master Pelham navigates it all without seeming to look at anything, the way a man walks through his own house in the dark. He's been doing this 30 years. He knows which puddles hide deeper holes beneath the mud, which alley mouths spit out carts without warning, which stalls to avoid because their owners owe him money and resent him for collecting it. "Mind the gutter there," he says without turning around, and you step over a channel of standing water, thick, with something you don't examine too closely just in time. By the time you clear the worst of the market crush, your shoulders ache from the tension of bracing against every jolt of the cart, terrified that one good shove from the crowd will send a crate tumbling. Master Pelham doesn't relax until Billingsgate is behind you and the streets open up into something resembling order. Narrower, quieter, the houses taller and closer together, leaning toward each other overhead until in places you can barely see the strip of grey sky between the roof lines. This is Thames Street, then a turn north, and the shop itself, Pelham's, a narrow frontage with shuttered windows and a hand-painted sign showing a bowl of fruit that's faded to almost nothing after years of weather, comes into view looking, as it always does to you, smaller than it has any right to be given how much of your life now happens inside it. You unload half the cargo there. The good lemons go into a cool back room lined with straw, each one nestled separately, so a single rotting fruit can't spread its decay to its neighbours. A lesson you learned the hard way in your first month, when you stacked a crate carelessly and came back 2 days later to find the whole lot reduced to a stinking fly-blown mush that Master Pelham made you scrub up yourself, on your knees, while he stood over you describing in detail exactly how much money you'd just thrown away. The spoiling ones, the near misses, the ones with soft spots starting at the stem but still mostly good, go into a separate basket. Those sell at a discount fast before they finish the job of dying. Apothecaries will sometimes take the spoiling ones for syrups and tinctures, where a slightly soft lemon matters less than a perfectly firm one would for a lord's table. Don't dawdle, Master Pelham says, already climbing back onto the cart with the remaining crates lashed tight. The Greshams expect us by noon, and Lady Gresham does not forgive lateness. You climb up beside him, and the cart lurches forward again, and London swallows you both. The Gresham house does not look like a house from the street. It looks like a small fortress that has decided out of politeness to pretend it is a house. High brick walls, a gatehouse manned by a porter who eyes your cart with the particular suspicion reserved for tradesmen, and beyond the gate, glimpsed through iron bars, a courtyard paved in stone so clean it looks freshly scrubbed every morning, which, you suspect, it is. You're not permitted through the front gate, of course. Tradesmen's carts go around to the side down a narrow lane that runs along the kitchen wall, where the smells change entirely. Wood smoke from half a dozen ovens, roasting meat, the green smell of fresh herbs being chopped somewhere just out of sight, and over all of it, faint but unmistakable, the same sweet, sharp citrus smell that's been living in your nose all morning, because the kitchen here has clearly received lemons before and recently. A scullery boy younger than you, his hands raw and red from scrubbing pots in water too hot, opens the side gate and lets the cart through with barely a glance, as if fruit deliveries are as unremarkable to him as bread. The cook who comes to inspect the cargo is a broad woman named Mistress Allard, sleeves rolled past her elbows, forearms dusted with flour, a face that has clearly survived decades of kitchen heat and kitchen disasters without losing its capacity for sharp judgment. She doesn't greet Master Pelham. She goes straight to the crates, picks up a lemon, weighs it in her palm, presses her thumb into the skin to test the give, holds it to her nose. "These came in this morning," she says. It isn't a question. "This morning, mistress, Margaret Rose out of Seville by way of Lisbon." She picks up another, tests it the same way. "Lady Gresham wants 24 for the syllabub tonight, and her ladyship's woman tells me the mistress has been feeling her gums again, so I'll want 12 more set aside for her water besides. You've brought enough?" 3 good ones, mistress, picked specially." You watch this exchange the way you've learned to watch every transaction Master Pelham conducts. Not for the words, which rarely matter much, but for the small physical tells that decide whether a sale goes well or badly. Mistress Allard's shoulders are relaxed. She isn't haggling, not really, just establishing that she knows quality from rot, that she can't be sold spoiled goods dressed up as fresh ones. It's a performance both of them understand and both of them respect. "Her ladyship's gums," she adds, almost to herself, sorting through the basket with quick, competent fingers, "have been bad since Candlemas. The physician says it's the winter diet. No greens, no fruit, nothing but salt meat and bread since Michaelmas, same as everyone else in this miserable city, except her ladyship can afford not to suffer for it, if someone keeps her supplied." "That's why we're here, mistress," Master Pelham says, and there's something almost gentle in how he says it, a tradesman's pride dressed up as humility. Mistress Allard glances at you then, properly for the first time, taking in your raw hands, the dried blood cracking at your knuckles, the general exhaustion written into how you're standing. "You'll want salt for those hands," she says, not unkindly. "Salt water, twice a day, else they'll fester. I've seen boys lose fingers to rope burn gone bad. Don't laugh at me, it happens." You weren't laughing. You file the advice away anyway, the way you've started doing with every scrap of practical wisdom anyone offers you. Because nobody in this city teaches you anything for free except the people who've decided, for whatever reason of their own, that you're worth the breath it costs them. The payment changes hands. Coin counted out precisely, no haggling once the goods are accepted, because the Greshams pay their tradesmen on time and expect to be supplied reliably in return, a relationship built on years of small transactions like this one. Master Pelham tucks the coins into a leather purse at his belt, and you load the empty crates back onto the cart, and the side gate swings shut behind you with a clang of iron that feels somehow like punctuation. "Good," Master Pelham mutters once you're back in the lane. "That's the easy part of the day done. Now we go to Webb's, and that is never the easy part." Apothecary Webb's shop sits at the bottom of a crooked lane that smells, even before you reach the door, of things steeping in vinegar and things drying in bunches from the rafters. The window is small and thick-paned, the glass distorting the light into wavering green, and through it you can just make out shelves crowded with jars. Some glass, some clay, all of them labelled in a cramped hand you've never managed to read properly, even when you've had cause to stare at them up close. Inside, the smell intensifies into something almost physical. Dried herbs, crushed and bundled, hanging in such density from the ceiling beams that Master Pelham has to duck twice crossing the small room. Vinegar, sharp enough to sting your eyes. Something burnt and resinous, frankincense maybe, or something cheaper pretending to be. And under it all, the same lemon smell that's been your whole morning, because Webb keeps a barrel of pickled lemon rinds in the back for his tinctures, and the smell never fully leaves the room. Webb himself is older than Master Pelham, stooped, with ink-stained fingers and spectacles that magnify his eyes into something faintly unsettling when he turns to look at you directly, which he does now, sizing you up the way he might size up an unfamiliar route someone's brought him to identify. "This the boy who lost his fingertip to the winch last year?" he asks Master Pelham, not unkindly. "Different boy, Master Webb. That was Davy from the Chandlers. This is mine, Robert." "Ah." Webb's magnified eyes blink slowly. "Well, Robert, mind your fingers around winches. I've sewn back 2 in my time, and neither patient thanked me for the experience. You don't know what to say to that, so you say nothing, which seems to be the correct response, because Webb has already turned his attention to the basket of lemons Master Pelham sets on the counter, the spoiling ones, soft at the stem, sold at a steep discount because nobody serves a soft lemon at a lady's table. But nobody minds a soft lemon boiled down into syrup either. "For the scurvy water?" Master Pelham asks. "For the scurvy water, and for 2 physicians who've taken to prescribing lemon juice in wine for gout. God help their patients' purses." Webb picks through the basket with the same testing motions Mistress Allard used. Thumb pressed into the rind, fruit held to the nose. "These'll do. Soft, but not turned. I can render the juice before they go properly bad." He pays in coin, smaller than the Greshams, but more reliable, because Webb buys every week without fail, rain or shine, war or peace. Because sickness doesn't keep to a calendar the way a lady's syllabub does. "You know what these are for, boy?" Webb asks suddenly, fixing you again with that magnified stare. "Scurvy, sir. Sailors get it." "Sailors get it worst, aye, because sailors go longest without anything green or sour passing their lips. But it's not just sailors. It's anyone who eats salt meat and bread all winter and nothing else, which in this city this time of year is most of it. The poor get scurvy same as sailors. They just don't have a name fancy enough for anyone to write it down." He holds up one of the soft lemons, turning it in the lamplight. "Nobody knows why this works. I don't know why it works. The physicians have theories, humours, this and that, the usual learned nonsense. But the truth is simpler and stranger than any of their theories. A man's gums bleed black and his teeth fall out and his old wounds open up again like they were never healed, and you give him this sour little fruit, and inside 2 weeks he's mending. We don't understand it, Dand. We just know it's true." He sets the lemon down. "That's worth remembering, boy. Some of the most important truths in this world, nobody's worked out the reason for yet. Doesn't make them less true. Just means we're still catching up to our own evidence. It's not the kind of thing Master Pelham says. It's not the kind of thing anyone in your life has said to you, actually, and it sits strangely in your chest for the rest of the afternoon, the way a true thing sometimes does when you're not used to hearing them spoken plainly. You leave Webb's shop with the empty basket and a coin pouch slightly heavier than it was, and the bells of some nearby church are striking 2 as you climb back onto the cart. "One more stop," Master Pelham says, already turning the donkey toward the river again. Captain Hollis wants 24 good lemons set aside for his next voyage out. "Bristol, then onward to the Americas," he says, though I never know whether to believe a man who tells me his route before he's even loaded his cargo. "Lemons for the crossing. Standard order. We deliver to the ship before she casts off this evening, or we lose the order to someone faster." The afternoon light is already starting its slow slide toward evening, thin and grey gold over the rooftops, and you climb back onto the cart with your blistered hands aching and your stomach growling, because nobody has mentioned food since dawn, and you suspect nobody is going to until the lemons are safely delivered. There's a pie seller near the custom house who does decent eel pie for a penny, and Master Pelham, in a rare fit of generosity that you suspect has more to do with keeping you upright for the rest of the day than any real warmth toward you, presses the coin into your hand and tells you to be quick about it. The pie is mostly eel, probably, though you've learned not to ask too closely what else has found its way into the filling. It's hot and greasy, and exactly what your body has been screaming for since dawn. You eat it standing against a wall, watching the river traffic slide past, wherries low in the water with passengers huddled against the cold, a coal barge riding deep and sluggish, a pair of swans drifting between the moored ships with the unbothered confidence of creatures who own the river and merely tolerate everyone else's presence on it. Your hands ache around the warm pastry. You flex your fingers between bites and feel the blisters pull and complain. Tomorrow they'll be worse before they're better. You know this from experience, the way a wound always insists on getting uglier before it starts to heal. By the time you've wiped the grease from your chin on your sleeve, Master Pelham is already loading the last of the day's good lemons, 24 of them picked carefully, the firmest and least bruised of what survived the morning's losses, into a smaller basket lined with straw. "Captain Hollis's order," he says, "for the crossing. Come on." The Margaret Rose sits lower in the water than she did this morning, her hold lightened of most of her cargo, the crew already moving about her deck with the particular busy energy of men preparing to leave on the next favourable tide. You climb the gangplank carefully, the basket of lemons balanced against your hip, while Master Pelham follows with the ship's bill in hand, already calculating in his head what this last sale will bring against what the morning cost him. Captain Hollis meets you at the rail, his weathered face creased into something that might be relief. 24 as ordered, Master Pelham says, gesturing for you to set the basket down on the deck. Good lad, Hollis says, though you're not sure if he means you or the lemons. He crouches and inspects the basket the way everyone today has inspected lemons. Thumb, nose, the unconscious ritual of a city that has learned, expensively, not to trust fruit on appearance alone. These'll keep us through to the Americas with luck and rationing. Last voyage we ran short 3 weeks out, and I lost a man to it before we made port. Lost his teeth first, then his strength, then near enough his mind, raving about home in a voice that didn't sound like his own anymore. He says this matter-of-factly, the way a man describes weather he's lived through many times, but something in his eyes when he says it tells you the memory hasn't softened with retelling. A sailor nearby, young, not much older than Davy, with a scar through one eyebrow that gives him a permanently surprised expression, overhears and steps closer, uninvited, the way sailors do when they've decided a conversation concerns them. Tom Avery, he says by way of introduction, though nobody asked. Sailed with the captain on that voyage he's telling you about. The man who died, Edward his name was. I shared a hammock space with him for 4 years, off and on. Good man. Bad death. He looks at the basket of lemons with an expression you don't have a word for yet. Something between gratitude and grief. You don't think about it until you've seen it, he says. A man's whole body coming apart slow, piece by piece, while there's nothing anyone can do but watch and hope the next port isn't too far off. And then someone tells you a sour little fruit from Spain might have saved him, if only there'd been enough of it aboard, and you spend the rest of your life making sure there's enough of it aboard. He reaches into the basket without asking permission, picks up a lemon, weighs it in his palm the way everyone today has weighed one. Funny thing to put your faith in, he says. A fruit. But I'll take faith wherever I find it out on that water. There's precious little else to hold on to some nights. He sets the lemon back, nods once, and returns to whatever work the captain's glare reminds him he should be doing. Master Pelham collects payment, full price, no discount, because these are the firmest lemons of the day's haul and Hollis knows it. And you climb back down the gangplank with the empty basket light against your hip, your mind still somewhere on that ship, thinking about a man named Edward, whose teeth fell out somewhere in the middle of an ocean you'll never cross, saved by nothing, while you spent your morning grumbling about blisters. It puts things into a different proportion somehow. You're not sure exactly how, but you can feel the shape of the lessons settling into you the way Webb's words did, sitting strangely and importantly in your chest. The light is properly failing now, the sky gone the colour of a bruise over the rooftops, and Master Pelham's mood has shifted into something more brisk and businesslike as the day's transactions wind down. We've 2 crates of good fruit left at the shop, he says, as you walk the donkey and cart back through streets growing quieter and darker by the minute. And 4 more due in on the morning tide from a second ship if the weather holds. That's a fortune sitting in my back room tonight, Robert, and I'll tell you plainly, I've had stock stolen before. You glance at him. He doesn't usually explain himself this much. Dock thieves know what's valuable, same as anyone, he continues. A crate of nails nobody risks a beating to steal. A crate of lemons, properly sold, fetches more than most men earn in a fortnight. There's men on this river who'd slit a throat for less profit than that. You want me to watch the shop tonight, you say. It isn't really a question. I want you to watch the shop tonight." He says it without apology, the way he says most things that are inconvenient for you and convenient for him. Davy's master's doing the same at the Chandler's. There's word going round that someone's been targeting warehouses near the bridge, helping themselves to whatever's easiest to carry and sell quick. I'd rather not be the next easy target. You'll have a lantern, a stout stick, and my word that if anyone tries anything, you shout for the watch before you do anything foolish. Understood? Understood, sir. You don't feel as steady saying it as you sound. The shop at night, alone, with a stranger's threat hanging vague and unspecified in the air, is not how you imagined ending a day that already cost you 2 layers of skin off your palms. But you don't say that either. You've learned, in 2 years, which thoughts are worth voicing to Master Pelham, and which ones simply have to be carried silently until they either resolve themselves or don't. The shop, when you reach it, looks smaller and more vulnerable than it has all day. A narrow wooden frontage pressed between a Cooper's and a Chandler's, shutters closed, the painted fruit bowl sign creaking faintly on its hinges in the evening wind. Inside, the back room holds the last of the day's good stock. 2 crates of firm, fragrant lemons worth, you do the rough sum in your head without meaning to, worth more than 4 months of your keep, sitting in straw in a room with a door that locks with nothing more than a simple iron bolt. Master Pelham lights the lantern himself, checks the bolt twice, and presses a stout ash stick into your hands that's clearly seen service before, the wood worn smooth where countless other hands have gripped it. "I'll be above," he says, nodding toward the narrow stairs leading up to the family's living quarters. "Shout if anything happens. Don't be a hero. A boy's worth more than a crate of lemons, whatever else you might think tonight. It's the closest thing to tenderness he's shown you all day, and it surprises you enough that you don't manage a proper response before he's already climbing the stairs, leaving you alone in the shop with a lantern, a stick, and the slow, sweet, dangerous smell of a fortune in citrus settling into the dark around you. The shop at night is a different country from the shop by day. By day it's noise and transaction, the door swinging on its hinges every few minutes, voices, coin, the ordinary business of selling fruit to a city that needs more of it than it can easily afford. By night it's silence pressing in from every side, broken only by the small sounds your own body makes, your breathing, the creak of the stool you're sitting on, the occasional pop of the lantern wick as it burns down. You sit near the back room door, the stick across your knees, the lantern set on an upturned crate beside you, throwing a small circle of orange light that doesn't reach more than a few feet in any direction, before the shadows swallow it whole. Beyond that circle, the shop is full of shapes you know by day. Shelves, baskets, the counter where transactions happen, the hooks where Master Pelham hangs his apron. But at night they've all gone strange and unfamiliar, crouching in the dark like things waiting to move. The smell of the lemons reaches you even through the closed door of the back room, that same sharp green sweetness that's been with you all day, mixed now with the colder smell of night air seeping through gaps in the shutters and the faint tar and river smell that never fully leaves any building this close to the Thames. Outside, the city hasn't gone to sleep, not really. London at night is never fully quiet. You hear a dog barking somewhere down the street, answered by another dog further off, a brief argument back and forth that fades eventually into nothing. You hear the watchman's bell somewhere 2 streets over, calling the hour in a voice too distant to make out the words. You hear footsteps occasionally, sometimes confident and unhurried, the footsteps of someone who belongs out at this hour and has nothing to fear from it, sometimes furtive and quick. The footsteps of someone who very much does not want to be noticed. Each set of footsteps makes your grip on the stick tighten slightly before they pass and fade, and you remember to breathe again. Time moves strangely when you're waiting for something you hope doesn't happen. You've been sitting for what feels like hours, though when the distant bell tolls again, you realize barely 90 minutes have passed. Your eyelids grow heavy despite the fear, despite the ache in your hands, despite everything. The body, apparently, does not care how dangerous a night might be once it's decided it's exhausted enough to sleep regardless. You pinch the inside of your wrist, hard, to keep yourself awake, and the small sting helps for a few minutes. It's somewhere past midnight. You guess this from the quality of silence outside, the particular dead hour when even the late drinkers have stumbled home and even the early risers haven't yet begun stirring. When you first hear something that isn't a dog or a watchman or an ordinary footstep passing by, it's a scrape. Soft, deliberate, coming from the direction of the shop's rear wall, the one that backs onto a narrow service alley shared with the Coopers next door. You go very still. The scrape comes again, then a pause, then a third scrape, longer this time, with a faint metallic edge to it that makes the hair on your arm stand up because you know that sound. It's the sound of a tool working at something it shouldn't, patient and quiet in the way that only a person who's done this before knows how to be patient and quiet. Your heart is suddenly very loud in your own ears. You sit absolutely motionless, the stick gripped so tight your blistered palms scream in protest, listening, trying to decide whether the sound is coming from the back room's outer wall, where the lemons sit in straw, worth more than 4 months of your keep, or from somewhere else entirely, somewhere that doesn't matter as much. It's the back room, you're almost certain. You think about shouting for Master Pelham. You think about his instructions. Don't be a hero. Shout if anything happens. And you open your mouth to do exactly that. But the sound stops. Silence stretches out, long enough that you start to wonder if you imagined it, if exhaustion and fear conjured a threat out of nothing the way a tired mind sometimes does. You sit there straining your ears into the dark, the lantern's small flame the only thing moving in the whole shop, and just when your shoulders start fractionally to unclench, glass breaks, not loud. A small, sharp, controlled crack, the sound of someone breaking a single pane deliberately rather than smashing through carelessly, and it's coming from the back room. And this time there's no doubt at all about where. You're on your feet before you've decided to be, the stick raised, your whole body flooded with a cold, clean fear that makes your skin feel too tight. Master Pelham! You shout, your voice cracking on the second syllable, and you hear it echo strangely in the closed shop, and you hear, almost simultaneously, a muffled curse from beyond the backroom wall. A man's voice, low, irritated, the voice of someone whose careful, quiet plan has just been ruined by a boy's shout. Footsteps thud above you. Master Pelham moving fast the stairs, groaning under his weight as he comes down 2 at a time. But something else is happening at the same moment. Something you don't understand yet. Something that announces itself first as a strange flickering orange light bleeding out from beneath the backroom door, and then as a smell that cuts through even the citrus and the night air, and the tar smell of the river and the unmistakable primal smell of smoke. Fire, the word tears out of you before you've consciously registered what you're seeing. But your body has understood faster than your mind, some ancient instinct recognizing the smell and the light, and the particular quality of danger they announce. Master Pelham hits the bottom of the stairs at a dead run, takes one look at the orange light under the door and doesn't hesitate for even a heartbeat. "Out!" he barks. "Get the door open, get out into the street, now!" But you're already moving toward the back room instead, not away from it, because some part of your mind, too fast for thought, too fast for sense, has fixed on the image of 2 crates of lemons, the morning's blistered hands, the 11 that drowned in the river, Edward the sailor whose teeth fell out somewhere in the middle of an ocean, and you cannot, in this single terrible moment, make your body accept the idea of losing the rest of it to fire as well. "Robert! No!" You shoulder the backroom door open and the heat hits you like a physical wall, a wave of it rolling out to meet you, and the light is no longer flickering and small. It's spreading fast along a line of spilled lamp oil that's caught the dry straw lining the crates. Fire crawling orange and hungry across the floor, climbing the side of the nearer crate with a speed that doesn't seem possible, that doesn't seem fair, that turns your stomach to ice even as your body keeps moving forward. There's a man at the broken window, the thief. You realize distantly, already half through the gap he cut, his face lit orange by the fire he must have started by accident, knocking his own lantern in his haste when your shout startled him. And for one frozen second your eyes meet his, and you see something in his face that you'll remember for the rest of your life. Not malice, not even fear exactly, but the blank animal calculation of someone deciding, in real time, whether this fire is worth dying for. It isn't. He decides that fast. He scrambles back through the broken window and is gone, and you are alone in a room that is rapidly filling with smoke and heat, and the specific acrid smell of burning straw and burning citrus oil, which is somehow worse than ordinary smoke, sweeter and sharper, stinging your eyes and throat in a way that makes you cough before you've even fully understood the shape of the danger you're standing in. "Robert!" Master Pelham's voice behind you now, hoarse with something that might be terror. The fire has reached the first crate fully, flame licking up the dry wooden slats, and inside you can actually hear, a faint hissing, popping sound that you understand, with a strange detached clarity, is the sound of lemons themselves beginning to scorch, the oil in their skins catching and sputtering. You grab the second crate, the one not yet burning, by its rope handles, and the wood is already warm under your blistered palms, and you haul backward with everything your exhausted body has left, dragging it across the floor toward the door, toward Master Pelham's shape silhouetted against the comparatively cooler dark of the main shop. Your eyes are streaming now, properly streaming, the smoke thick enough that you can barely make out the doorway, and your lungs are starting to burn with each breath, a deep aching protest that tells you, with increasing urgency, that you do not have much longer in this room. "Leave it!" Master Pelham is shouting, but you don't leave it. You keep hauling, your boots skidding on straw gone slick with spilled oil, and then his hands are suddenly there too, gripping the other side of the crate, and together you wrestle it through the doorway and into the main shop, where the air is instantly, miraculously breathable again. "Out! Out!" he gasps, and this time you don't argue. The two of you dragging the crate between you across the shop floor. Through the front door he must have unbolted in the seconds before he came to find you, and out into the cold night street, where the air tastes like the cleanest thing you've ever breathed. Behind you, the shop's back room is burning properly now. You can see the orange glow through the broken window, hear a faint roaring building inside, and somewhere above you a window bangs open, and a voice. Mistress Pelham, you realize. sounding more frightened than you've ever heard a grown woman sound, starts screaming for the watch, for help, for water, for anyone. The street is waking up around you with terrible speed. Doors banging open up and down the row, neighbours stumbling out half-dressed, someone already running toward the conduit at the street's end where a public water supply feeds a stone trough, someone else beating a tin pan with a spoon in the universal ear-splitting signal of "Fire, fire, everyone wake up, fire, wake up." You stand in the street with your lungs heaving, your eyes still streaming, one crate of lemons saved and sitting beside you on the cobbles, while inside the other crate and the back room and possibly the whole shop burns, and Master Pelham stands beside you with both hands pressed flat against the top of his head. The universal posture of a man watching his life's investment go up in smoke and finding no words adequate to the moment. "You absolute fool of a boy," he says eventually, his voice shaking badly. "You could have died in there, for lemons, for fruit, Robert." "I'm sorry, sir," you manage, though you're not entirely sure what you're apologising for. Going in, or only saving half of what was at stake, or simply being the kind of person who couldn't stop himself from trying. He doesn't answer. He's already turning toward the bucket chain forming at the conduit, already shouting instructions, already becoming, in the space of a few seconds, the version of himself that exists only in emergencies, sharp, fast, entirely focused on the immediate problem of stopping the fire from spreading to the cooper's shop next door, where stacks of dry barrel staves would turn one burning shop into an entire burning street with terrifying speed. You join the bucket chain because there's nothing else to do with your hands, passing leather buckets of water hand to hand down the line, from the conduit to the men nearest the shop, who fling each bucketful through the broken window and the now open front door with the desperate, repetitive rhythm of people fighting something much bigger than themselves. Your palms, already raw from the morning's rope work, scream every time a heavy bucket passes through them, but you don't stop, you don't even really notice it as pain anymore. Just as one more sensation in a night that has stopped making sense as anything except a series of urgent physical tasks. Pass the bucket. Take the empty one back. Pass the bucket. Your arms burn. Your throat is raw from smoke and shouting. The fire's glow throws everyone's face into harsh orange relief, sweating, grim, working. It takes the better part of an hour before the worst of it is beaten back. Not before serious damage is done. The back room gutted, the roof above it scorched black and partly collapsed. But before the fire spreads to the cooper's shop, before the whole row goes up the way everyone secretly feared it might, the way fires in this city sometimes do, turning streets into ash and families into beggars within a single terrible night, by the time the last embers are properly doused, the eastern sky has started faintly to lighten. Not dawn yet, but the first thinning of true darkness that promises dawn is coming. You sit on the cobbles outside what's left of the shop, soot-streaked, soaked through with water that's gone cold against your skin, your hands a ruin of new blisters layered over old ones, and you stare at the single surviving crate of lemons sitting beside you, miraculously intact, smelling faintly of smoke now, but otherwise whole, and you start, without entirely meaning to laugh, a thin, exhausted, slightly unhinged laugh that has very little humour in it and everything to do with simply being alive. Master Pelham sits down heavily beside you. His face is filthy, his eyebrows singed slightly at one edge, his whole posture that of a man who has aged several years in the space of one night. "We'll rebuild the back room," he says, mostly to himself. "Insurance through the company will cover some of it. Not all, never all. He looks at the surviving crate. That's worth something, at least. Not nothing. The thief, you say. He got away. He did. Master Pelham's jaw tightens. Word will go round the docks by midday. Men talk, even thieves, especially thieves. Someone will know his face eventually. These things have a way of catching up with a man. He's quiet for a long moment, watching the faint grey light strengthening over the rooftops. You shouldn't have gone back in, he says finally. I want that understood, plainly between us. A crate of lemons is not worth your life. Not this crate, not any crate, not ever. Do you understand me? Yes, sir. Say it properly. A crate of lemons isn't worth my life, you say, and find, somewhat to your own surprise, that you mean it more than you did an hour ago, when the fire was still just an abstract danger, rather than something that had actually tried, in its blind and indifferent way, to take you. Master Pelham nods, satisfied, or as satisfied as a man can be while sitting in the wreckage of half his livelihood. But, he adds, after a moment, in a voice that's almost gentle, I won't pretend I'm not grateful for the crate you did save. That's near enough 30 lemons, Robert. 30 lemons is £2, easily, sold properly. That's not nothing on a night like this. It's the closest he'll ever come, you suspect, to telling you that what you did mattered. You take it for what it is. Dawn comes properly while you're still sitting on the cobbles, and it brings with it the full, ugly picture of what the night cost. The back room is a blackened ruin, its roof partly fallen in, the straw and the lost crate reduced to a sodden, ash-streaked mess that still smells, faintly and sickeningly, of burnt citrus oil, sweeter than ordinary smoke, wrong in a way your nose registers as deeply unnatural even now, hours later, with the fire long since drowned. The front of the shop has survived mostly intact, smoke-stained, one window cracked from the heat, but standing. Mistress Pelham comes down once the danger has properly passed, wrapped in a shawl thrown hastily over her nightclothes, and the look on her face when she sees the back room makes you feel, for a moment, smaller and more ashamed than anything Master Pelham said to you in the street. She doesn't shout. She simply stands in the doorway surveying the wreckage, her hand pressed flat against her own chest, as though physically holding herself together. Ah, we're alive, Master Pelham tells her quietly, which seems to be the only thing either of them can find to say to the wreckage. That's the whole of it. We're alive, and we've a crate of good stock left, and the front of the shop still stands. We'll rebuild. You spend the rest of that day, and most of the 3 days following, doing the grim, exhausting work of clearing the burnt ruin, hauling out blackened, waterlogged debris, scrubbing soot from the surviving walls until your hands, already a ruin of blisters, develop new sores from the lye soap and the constant wet work. Your whole body aches in ways it didn't even after the rope burns and the bucket chain, a deep bone-level exhaustion that sleep doesn't fully cure. But there's a strange comfort in the work too, the kind that comes from doing something with your hands that visibly, measurably improves a bad situation, one wheelbarrow load of ash at a time. By the third evening the back room is at least clear, the worst of the smoke smell scrubbed from the front of the shop, and a carpenter Master Pelham has known for years has come to assess what timber and labour it'll take to rebuild the roof and walls properly before the next shipment is due. Word does, as Master Pelham predicted, travel fast along the docks. On the fourth morning, a man named Cutter, one of the watermen who works the stretch near the bridge, the same kind of man who might have rowed you across the river on any ordinary day, comes by the shop to report, almost casually, over a cup of small beer Mistress Pelham offers him out of gratitude, that the thief has been identified, a dockside labourer named Spry, known for petty theft along the warehouses, caught 2 nights later trying the same trick at a chandler's further upriver, except that time the chandler's dog woke before the man finished forcing the window, and the watch caught him with his tool still in hand. He'll answer for it, Cutter says, with the flat unconcern of a man discussing weather rather than another man's fate. Magistrates' court, next sessions, theft and arson together. That's transportation if he's lucky, the rope if he's not. Not my business which. You wait for some surge of satisfaction at this news, some sense of justice landing where it belongs. But mostly what you feel is tired. You think of the man's face at the broken window, lit orange by a fire he hadn't meant to start, deciding in that frozen second whether it was worth dying for. You don't feel triumphant that his luck has run out. You mostly feel like the whole business, the theft, the fire, the magistrate's court waiting somewhere ahead of him with its rope or its ship bound for a penal colony, is simply one more way this city grinds people down, thieves and victims both, and you're not entirely sure, lying awake that night turning the news over in your mind, where exactly the justice in it is supposed to be found. You don't say any of this to Master Pelham. You're not sure he'd understand the question, and you're not entirely sure you understand it yourself. The following Sunday, with the shop still closed for repairs and no trade to be done, Master Pelham, in a gesture that surprises you nearly as much as the pie money did, tells you to take the day for yourself. You've worked harder this fortnight than I've any right to ask, he says, not quite meeting your eye, in the particular way he has of being kind without wanting to make a ceremony of it. Go, see something that isn't a crate of lemons or a pile of ash. I'll expect you back by evening service, mind, not a moment later. You don't entirely know what to do with a free day. 2 years of apprenticeship have trained your body to expect labour from the moment the bells ring for dawn, and the sudden absence of any task feels almost uncomfortable, like a held breath you don't know how to release. You end up walking, without any particular destination, north and west, away from the river and the smell of smoke that still seems to cling faintly to the inside of your own nose no matter how many days pass. The streets thin out gradually as the city's density loosens its grip, until you find yourself climbing a long, gentle hill on the city's outskirts, where the houses give way to fields and the air, for the first time in longer than you can remember, doesn't smell of anything in particular except grass and cold and wood smoke from distant cottage chimneys. There's an old windmill at the top of the hill. It sails motionless in the still afternoon air, and beside it a low stone wall where a man sits mending a fishing net with quick, practised fingers, a basket of tackle beside him, and a pipe clenched, unlit, between his teeth. "Long way to come for a view, boy," he says, without looking up as you stop nearby, your breath still coming hard from the climb. "I didn't come for the view," you say. "I just walked." He glances up then, taking in your soot-darkened cuffs, the rope-burn scars still healing across your palms. The general exhaustion you suspect is written plainly across your whole posture. Walked from somewhere with a fire in it, by the look of your hands. You tell him, because there's something about a stranger on a hilltop, someone with no stake in your daily life, that makes it easier to talk than it ever is with Master Pelham or even with Davy. You tell him about the lemons, the rope burns, the man at the broken window, the fire crawling across the straw faster than seemed fair, the bucket chain, the single crate saved. He listens without interrupting, his fingers never stopping their work on the net until you've talked yourself out and fallen quiet, slightly embarrassed at how much you've said to someone whose name you don't even know. "I fished this river 30 years, he says eventually, before my knees gave out and my son took over the boat. 30 years, and I'll tell you the one thing the water teaches you that nothing else quite manages to. It's this: nothing you save matters half as much as the saving of yourself. The fish you lose over the side, the net that tears in a bad haul, the catch that spoils before you reach market. None of it is worth a man's life. Not one fish, not one net, not one boatload." He sets the net down for a moment, looks out over the view spread below the hill, the city in the distance, a grey-brown smear of rooftops and smoke under the pale afternoon sky, the silver thread of the river cutting through the middle of it, ships small as toys at this distance, the dome and spire of churches rising above the general crowd of ordinary buildings. "And yet," he says, "every man who works a hard trade finds himself sooner or later risking exactly that, diving back for the net, running back into the smoke. We can't seem to help it. There's something in us that values the work more than it ought to, given the stakes. Is that foolish, you ask? What I did?" He considers this longer than you expect. Foolish? Aye. And also the kind of foolish that builds something in a man, if it doesn't kill him first. You'll think twice next time. That's not nothing. A boy who's never been foolish never learns where the line sits. You found yours a little early, that's all. Better early than never. You sit with him a while longer, watching the light shift slowly across the distant rooftops, the whole vast sprawl of the city laid out below you like something you could hold in your two cupped hands if you reached far enough. From up here, you can't smell the smoke or the fish guts or the river mud. You can't hear the shouting of the market or the creak of the rope or the particular silence of a shop at midnight, waiting for danger to arrive. From up here, it's just a city, beautiful almost, in the soft afternoon light, distant enough that all its ugliness smooths itself out into something you could almost call peaceful. You think about how small you are inside all of it. One apprentice, one shop, one crate of lemons saved out of however many thousand transactions happen across that whole grey sprawl every single day. The thought doesn't frighten you the way it might have 2 years ago, fresh off the cart from Maidstone. It settles into you instead as something almost comforting. The knowledge that the city is bigger than any single night's disaster, bigger than any single boy's mistakes, and that somehow, despite everything, it keeps going, the way the river below keeps flowing regardless of what's lost in it or saved from it on any given morning. The old fisherman picks his net back up, his fingers resuming their quick, patient work. "Go on home, boy," he says, not unkindly. "Your master will worry, and worry makes hard men harder. No sense giving him cause." You thank him, though you're not entirely sure what you're thanking him for, and start the long walk back down the hill toward the smoke and noise and smell of the only life you currently have. The rebuilding takes the better part of 3 weeks. New timber for the roof, new straw and racking for the back room, a fresh coat of lime wash over the smoke-stained front wall that leaves the shop looking, for a brief and strange while, cleaner and more prosperous than it has in years, an odd kind of silver lining stitched onto the edge of a genuine disaster. You spend those weeks doing whatever work doesn't require the back room to be finished, running errands across the city, learning to grade fruit by feel with your eyes closed, which Master Pelham insists on testing you with regularly, holding up lemon after lemon for you to judge blind by weight and give and smell alone, correcting you sharply when you're wrong, and grunting something that might be approval when you're right. A man who has to look at every piece of fruit to know its worth, he tells you more than once, will never be fast enough to make a living at this trade. Your hands should know before your eyes catch up. By midsummer, your hands do know. You can close your eyes, take a lemon from a stranger's basket, and tell within a breath whether it's a week from ripe, 3 days from spoiling, or already past saving. A skill that feels, the first few times you demonstrate it successfully, almost like a small private magic trick, though Master Pelham would scoff at the word. The heat of summer brings its own particular miseries to the trade. The Thames at low tide in July is an assault on the senses unlike anything winter produces. The mudflats baking under the sun release a stench thick enough to make your eyes water from 50 yards off, and the lemons themselves spoil twice as fast in the heat, demanding constant vigilance, constant sorting, constant flinging of soft fruit into baskets meant for the pig keepers who'll take spoiled produce for feed at almost no cost at all. You learn to work the hottest hours of the day in the shop's coolest back corner, away from the street-facing window where the afternoon sun pours through and turns the whole front room into something close to an oven. Master Pelham keeps a damp cloth draped over the best of the day's stock during the worst of the heat, periodically wetting it again from a bucket, a small ongoing battle against decay that never quite ends. Not for one single day, not ever in this trade. A ship comes in that August carrying a physician bound for a long voyage to the Levant, and he buys nearly the whole of one shipment outright. 300 lemons, paid for in full, packed specially in barrels of dry sand that Master Pelham insists will slow the rot far better than straw, an old trick he learned from a Genoese trader years before you arrived. The physician, a thin, anxious man named Dr. Aldous, explains to you while you help pack the barrels that he's seen entire crews lost to scurvy on voyages that ran longer than expected, men's bodies failing by slow degrees in ways that no other medicine he carries can touch. It's not a cure, I understand, he admits, echoing almost exactly what Webb told you months before, as though every learned man in this trade has independently arrived at the same honest confession of ignorance. But I've seen it work too many times to doubt it any longer. Whatever the physicians at the college say about humours and balance, sometimes the evidence outruns the theory, and a wise man learns to trust the evidence. You think of Tom Avery's words on the deck of the Margaret Rose, faith wherever you find it, and you find yourself nodding before you've quite decided to. Autumn brings rain that turns Billingsgate's mud into something nearly impassable, and a delivery cart wheel that snaps clean through on a rutted lane near the bridge, spilling half a crate of good stock into a puddle thick with filth, an afternoon's loss that costs Master Pelham more in temper than in actual coin, since most of the fruit, washed and dried quickly enough, proves salvageable after all. By the time winter closes back in, a full year almost exactly since the night of the fire, you've grown, not just in skill, though there's plenty of that too, but in some less easily named way that you notice mostly in how differently the city treats you now. Costermongers nod to you by name in the market instead of shoving past you as an obstacle. Mistress Allard at the Gresham's kitchen greets you with something approaching warmth, no longer offering unsolicited advice about salt water for your hands, because your hands, by now, have healed into something tougher, a permanent landscape of calluses that no longer blister at the first sign of rough rope. A new apprentice arrives that winter, a boy named Watt, 11 years old, sent up from somewhere near Canterbury with a letter of introduction, and considerably less coin sewn into his coat than you arrived with. He's small and quick and terrified of everything, flinching at every loud voice in the market, getting lost twice in his first week trying to find his way back from a simple errand 2 streets over. You recognise him immediately, the way you recognise your own reflection in a still puddle. The particular wide-eyed bewilderment of a country boy who has not yet understood that this city, for all its danger and noise and casual cruelty, can eventually become something almost like home if you survive long enough to learn its rhythms. It gets easier, you tell him one evening, when he's lying awake in the attic they now share, too overwhelmed by the day's noise and strangeness to sleep. Exactly the way you once lay awake yourself. Exactly the way Davy once told you the same words on a night you've mostly forgotten, until this moment of saying them yourself. He doesn't believe you. You can hear the disbelief in his silence, the particular quality of doubt that comes from a boy who has only ever known this city as something enormous and threatening, nothing yet as something that might, eventually, fit around him the way a worn coat fits a familiar shoulder. But he will believe it, eventually. You know this now in a way you couldn't have known it a year ago, because you've lived the proof of it yourself. The slow, almost invisible way a place stops being foreign and starts instead being simply where you live. Master Pelham watches you train Wat through his first weeks with something in his expression you've learned, over 2 years, to recognise as quiet satisfaction, though he'd never say so plainly. You catch him once, watching you patiently demonstrate to Wat how to test a lemon's ripeness by feel alone, and something in the older man's posture eases in a way you've only seen happen around money safely banked, or stock successfully sold, or disasters successfully averted. You'll make a fruiterer yet, he tells you that evening gruffly over the evening meal, which from him is roughly equivalent to another man weeping with pride. Few more years, you'll be a journeyman. Few years past that, with luck and steady hands, you might have your own shop, your own sign over your own door, your own apprentices learning to test fruit blind, same as I taught you. It feels impossibly distant, said out loud like that. Your own shop, your own sign, some future version of yourself standing where Master Pelham stands now, training some other frightened boy fresh off a cart from somewhere with no fruit worth speaking of. But it doesn't feel impossible the way it would have a year ago. It feels instead like a road you can actually picture yourself walking, one rope-burned, smoke-stained, citrus-scented day at a time. The second year of your apprenticeship brings a different kind of danger, one that has nothing to do with fire or thieves and everything to do with weather, and it arrives on a Tuesday in late October, when the sky over London turns a colour you've never quite seen before. A bruised yellowish grey that the older watermen along the quay eye with open suspicion long before the first drop of rain falls. Storm coming, one of them tells Master Pelham, not as a guess but as a flat statement of fact. The kind of certainty that comes from decades of reading the sky the way you've learned to read a lemon's rind. Bad one too, by the look of that colour. You've stock on the water? You have stock on the water. The Margaret Rose, the same ship, the same Captain Hollis, though the cargo this time is twice the size of that first fraught morning 2 years ago, is due in on the evening tide, somewhere off the coast still, beating up the channel toward the mouth of the Thames, with £350 of borrowed money riding in her hold in the shape of lemons from Seville. Master Pelham's face, when the waterman delivers this assessment, goes through several expressions in quick succession: calculation, worry, and finally a kind of grim resignation that you've learned to associate with situations entirely beyond his control. Nothing to be done about weather, he says, mostly to himself. She'll make port or she won't. Standing here wringing my hands won't change the wind. But he doesn't go home. None of you do. As the afternoon wears on and the sky darkens further, and the first gusts of wind start whipping loose straw and discarded fish scraps along the quay in small frantic spirals, Master Pelham simply moves the day's business to the shelter of a covered wharf shed and continues working, selling what stock remains from the previous shipment, his eyes flicking constantly, almost involuntarily, toward the river mouth where the Margaret Rose ought eventually to appear. The storm announces itself properly around 4 in the afternoon. The wind goes from gusting to constant in the space of perhaps 10 minutes, a steady shoving pressure against your whole body that makes walking in a straight line require real effort, and the rain that follows it isn't rain so much as horizontal water, flung sideways with enough force to sting any exposed skin like 100 small slaps. You huddle with Watt and Davy, who has wandered over from the Chandlers, drawn by the same nervous energy that's gathering all along the waterfront, as every merchant with stock on the water converges to watch and wait and worry together, under the wharf shed's leaking roof, watching the river itself transform in front of you. The Thames at ordinary times is a working river, busy and brown and unremarkable. The Thames in a proper autumn gale is something closer to an animal, white-capped and heaving, slapping against the wharf pilings with a violence that sends spray right up over the edge of the quay, soaking everyone standing within 10 feet of it. Boats that were moored peacefully an hour ago now strain and buck against their lines, masts swaying through arcs that look, from where you're standing, dangerously close to capsizing. A wherry that was halfway across the river when the gale hit properly is now fighting for its life. The waterman at the oars working with the desperate, all-or-nothing intensity of a man who has correctly understood that the next few minutes will decide whether he sees his family again. You watch, your stomach knotted tight, as a small boat is shoved sideways by a wave, recovers, gets shoved again, and somehow, through skill or luck or simple stubbornness, claws its way to the nearest landing stage just as another gust threatens to roll it. The crowd gathered along the quay, soaked and shivering, lets out a ragged cheer as the waterman scrambles ashore, his boat already half swamped, his face white with something that isn't entirely the cold. But the Margaret Rose is still out there somewhere, beyond the river mouth, somewhere in the grey, churning chaos of the estuary, where the river meets open water and the storm has presumably far more room to do its worst. Master Pelham doesn't speak for a long stretch of time, standing at the edge of the shed with rain dripping steadily off the brim of his hat, his eyes fixed on the river mouth, as though sheer attention might somehow influence what's happening miles beyond his sight. "If she goes down," he says eventually quietly, not quite to anyone, "that's the shop, Robert. That's 3 years of careful saving, gone into a single hold of fruit, and if she goes down, there's no rebuilding from it. Not the way we rebuilt after the fire. A fire takes your stock and your roof. A lost ship takes everything you borrowed against to pay for it besides." You don't know what to say to that. There's nothing to say to it. You simply stand beside him, soaked through, watching the same churning grey horizon, and wait, because waiting is the only available action, and waiting in weather like this feels like its own kind of labour, exhausting in a way that has nothing to do with rope or muscle. The hours crawl. The storm doesn't ease. If anything, it worsens as evening properly sets in, the failing daylight adding a new dimension of fear, because now whatever ships are still out there are fighting the gale in near darkness. with only their own skill and whatever luck the sea is willing to grant them. Lanterns are lit along the quay despite the rain, hung from poles and hooks at intervals, throwing small, struggling circles of orange light across the wet stone, more for the comfort of having some light against the gathering dark than for any real navigational use. You can see other merchants doing exactly what Master Pelham is doing, standing at the water's edge, soaked, silent, staring out at a horizon that offers no information, simply because standing anywhere else feels unbearable, while the fate of so much money and, more importantly, so many lives remains unknown. It's nearly 7 in the evening, full dark now except for the lanterns and a thin, watery moon fighting through gaps in the racing clouds, when someone near the river mouth starts shouting, "Sail! Sail off the point!" The whole crowd along the quay surges forward as one body, craning to see, and you push forward with them, your heart suddenly hammering, straining your eyes against the dark and the rain toward where the shout indicated. There. A shape, barely visible, pitching hard against the waves, one light burning at her stern that flickers and nearly vanishes every time she rolls deep into a trough before climbing the next swell. Is it her? Watt asks beside you, his voice tight with an excitement that hasn't yet learned to be tempered by fear of disappointment. Nobody can say for certain, not yet, not at this distance and in this darkness. But Master Pelham's whole posture has changed, leaning forward, one hand gripping the wharf shed support post hard enough that his knuckles have gone white. The ship, if it is the ship, fights its way closer with agonizing slowness, every yard gained against the storm looking from the shore like a battle being fought and barely won. You watch her roll, recover, roll again, disappear entirely behind a swell large enough to swallow her whole, and reappear somehow still afloat, still fighting, still coming. It takes the better part of another hour before she's close enough for anyone to be certain, and the certainty, when it comes, arrives as a name shouted down the quay from someone closer to the water than you, someone who's recognized the particular shape of her bow, or the cut of her remaining sail even through the storm and the dark. Margaret Rose! It's the Margaret Rose! Master Pelham makes a sound you've never heard him make before. Something between a laugh and a sob, sharp and involuntary. The sound of a man whose entire fortune has just, against considerable odds, decided not to die tonight. The ship doesn't come straight in. She can't. Not in this wind, not at this hour. She has to be worked carefully toward a mooring by a crew that has clearly been fighting for their lives for hours and has nothing left but grim, exhausted competence to draw on, every manoeuvre slow and careful and visibly costing them dearly in effort they don't have to spare. It takes nearly another hour before she's properly secured, lines thrown and caught and made fast by hands on the quay that are as eager to help as the sailors aboard are to be helped, and by the time Captain Hollis himself staggers down the gangplank, soaked to the skin, his face grey with exhaustion, half the merchants on the wharf are already converging on him with a mixture of relief and anxious questions about the state of their cargo. "We lost a yard," he says, before anyone can even ask, his voice hoarse and stripped raw, presumably from hours of shouting orders over the storm. Cracked clean through somewhere off the Nore, lost half our speed for it, fighting the whole gale on reduced sail, but we held together better than I had any right to expect. "The cargo?" Master Pelham asks, and you can hear, underneath the careful evenness of his voice, exactly how much is balanced on the answer. "Wet," Hollis admits. Some water got into the hold when we shipped a wave bad enough to fill the deck ankle deep. I won't lie to you, Pelham. Some of your fruit's likely spoiled from the seawater more than usual, more than I'd want to promise you in calmer weather, but she didn't go down. Whatever's left of that cargo, it's a damn sight better than nothing, and nothing is what we were all staring at for a good few hours out there tonight. Master Pelham closes his eyes briefly, and when he opens them, something in his whole face has loosened. The tight, controlled fear of the last several hours finally permitted to ease into something like relief, however qualified by the knowledge of fresh losses still to be assessed. You spend the rest of that night, well past midnight, working by lantern light in the driving aftermath drizzle that follows the worst of the storm, hauling crates up from a hold that smells when you finally climb down into it yourself to help with the worst of the work, like the inside of a shipwreck, salt water, vomit from men who'd been violently seasick for hours, and underneath it all, the ever-present sweet sharp smell of citrus, now mixed with something sourer and wronger, where seawater has gotten into crates and accelerated the rot that was always, eventually coming for every single piece of fruit in that hold regardless of weather. The losses, when finally tallied in the grey light of the following dawn, are bad. Nearly half the shipment ruined by salt water and the rough handling of a storm-tossed crossing. But not the total catastrophe Master Pelham feared standing at the water's edge the previous evening. Enough survives, just barely, to cover the debt against the voyage and turn a thin, exhausted profit besides. Better than the bottom of the sea, Master Pelham says, surveying the wreckage of soaked salt-ruined fruit being sorted into baskets destined for the pig-keepers rather than any lord's table. Better than the bottom of the sea by a considerable margin. You think of Captain Hollis's exhausted face on the gangplank, of the wherry that nearly capsized crossing the river, of the cracked yard that nearly cost the whole ship her speed and possibly her survival, and you understand in a way that the morning of the 11 drowned lemons 2 years ago never quite taught you, exactly how thin the margin is between an ordinary Tuesday and a genuine catastrophe in this trade. How every single crate that reaches your hands intact has survived not just rotten rough handling but storms, currents, the simple indifferent violence of weather that doesn't know or care what cargo it's tossing around in its grip. It makes the fruit somehow feel different in your hands afterward, heavier, more valuable than its price alone would suggest. Every lemon that survives a crossing like that one has, in its own small way, earned its place on someone's table. By your 3rd year, Master Pelham trusts you with errands that take you well beyond the familiar triangle of shop, quay and market that defined your first months in the city. One of these, in the spring of that year, sends you to the customs house near the bridge to settle the duty owed on a shipment before it can legally be sold, and it's there, waiting in a long draughty hall full of clerks and merchants and the particular smell of ink and damp wool that seems to live permanently in any room full of paperwork, that you first properly glimpse the size of the trade you've been a small part of all this time. The hall is loud with transaction, not the shouting chaos of Billingsgate, but a quieter, more controlled kind of noise. Men in good coats discussing cargoes worth more than Master Pelham's entire shop. Ships' manifests being read aloud and checked against ledgers. The scratch of quills recording sums that make your own modest trade in lemons look, suddenly, very small indeed. You overhear while waiting your turn a conversation between 2 merchants about a venture to the Levant that's lost 2 ships out of 4 to a combination of weather and what one of them calls, in a lowered voice, unfriendly waters, a polite term, you gather, for piracy. The other merchant nods grimly and says something about underwriters and premiums that you don't fully understand, except that the gist of it is plain enough. Even men far wealthier than Master Pelham live with the same fear you watched eat at him during the storm, just multiplied many times over, with many more lives and many more fortunes riding on the same indifferent sea. A clerk finally calls your business forward, checks Master Pelham's manifest against the ship's own paperwork, calculates the duty owed with the brisk efficiency of a man who has done this exact sum 10,000 times, and sends you on your way with a stamped receipt that feels, in your hand, disproportionately important for such a small scrap of paper. Proof that an entire shipload of lemons exists legally, that it can be sold, that Master Pelham's investment has cleared one more hurdle on its long journey from a Spanish orchard to some Londoner's table. Walking back from the customs house, you find yourself taking the longer route along the river simply to look at it. The forest of masts crowding the upstream wharves, ships from places you've only heard named in passing, carrying goods you'll never personally handle. Wine, wool, timber, spices whose smell you sometimes catch, drifting from a warehouse door left open for loading, sugar in great heavy barrels that take 4 men to roll, and other cargoes nobody discusses openly, that you've learned not to ask too many questions about. It strikes you, standing there for a moment with the stamped receipt still in your hand, how small your own corner of this enormous machine actually is, and how strange it is that something as small and perishable as a lemon, a fruit that dies almost as fast as it can be carried, manages to be worth fighting storms and thieves and fire for, manages to matter enough that physicians prescribe it, and captains insist on it, and ladies pay good coin to have it pressed into their water against the ache of their own bleeding gums. You think, not for the first time, about Webb's words in his crowded little shop. Some of the most important truths in this world, nobody's worked out the reason for yet. And you wonder whether that's true of more than just scurvy, whether half the things holding this whole vast, noisy, dangerous city together are connections nobody's fully explained, trades and trusts and small daily acts of competence that simply work somehow, without anyone quite understanding all the reasons why. That evening, Davy, now a journeyman himself, no longer bound to the chandlers but working for wages and saving toward a shop of his own someday, invites you to a tavern near the bridge to celebrate his recent independence. And you go, partly because you've earned a rare free evening, and partly because 3 years in this city have taught you that the company of people who understand exactly what your hands have been through is worth more than almost any other comfort available. The tavern is loud and warm and smells of spilled ale and wood smoke, and too many bodies pressed into too small a room, and you find a spot at a long table where Davy's already deep in conversation with 2 other journeymen you half recognise from around the docks. "To freedom," Davy says, raising his cup, and the toast goes round the table with the particular enthusiasm of young men who've spent years being told what to do and have only recently begun discovering what it feels like otherwise. You drink less than the others. You've learned, watching roommates and journeymen stumble home from nights like this one, exactly what gin and too much ale can do to a man's judgment and his coin purse both. But you stay late anyway, listening to stories that range from comic to half-believable, to clearly invented outright, enjoying the simple, rare pleasure of an evening where nobody expects anything from your hands. A man at a neighbouring table, older, with the weathered look of someone who's spent decades on the water in one capacity or another, catches snatches of your conversation about lemons and leans over, with the unself-conscious familiarity that ale tends to produce in strangers. "Lemons," he says. shaking his head with something like wonder. "I sailed 30 years and never once thought a piece of fruit could matter so much to a man's survival. You lot in the fruit trade don't get half the credit you deserve. Everyone toasts the captain, toasts the merchant who financed the voyage, toasts the king for his navy. Nobody toasts the fruiterer's boy who made sure there was something sour enough aboard to keep half the crew's teeth in their heads." "I'll drink to that," Davy says, laughing, and the table does, raising cups to you with cheerful, half-mocking ceremony that nonetheless leaves something warm settled in your chest for the rest of the night. You walk home alone afterward, the streets dark in the way they're always dark once full night properly falls. No lanterns hung along most of the route, except where a tavern's open door spills light briefly across the cobbles before swinging shut again. You've learned, over 3 years, exactly which streets to avoid this late, which shadows tend to hide footpads rather than simply sleeping beggars, which corners to give a wide and unhurried berth. You make it home without incident, slip through the side door Master Pelham long ago stopped pretending not to notice you using after hours, and climb the narrow stairs to the attic room you now share with Watt, who's deeply, peacefully asleep, his breathing slow and even in the dark. You lie down without bothering to undress fully, too pleasantly tired from ale and good company to manage more than pulling off your boots, and you stare up at the low ceiling, listening to the city's faint ongoing murmur seep up through the floorboards. A cart somewhere, a dog barking, the distant call of a watchman marking an hour you're too contentedly drowsy to count. 3 years ago you arrived in this city knowing nothing, owning almost nothing, terrified of nearly everything. Tonight, you've sat at a tavern table being toasted by journeymen for a trade you've come to understand in your bones. You carry a stamped customs house receipt in your memory as proof of your own competence, and you've walked dark streets you once feared without a single moment of real alarm, because you know them now, the way you know the weight and give of a good lemon in your palm. You're not the boy who stepped off that cart from Maidstone. You're something else now. Something the city has been slowly, patiently shaping out of that frightened raw material, one rope burn and one storm watch and one bucket chain at a time. You fall asleep before you've finished the thought, the way exhaustion sometimes simply arrives and ends a day's reflection without ceremony, mid-sentence, mid-feeling. The way sleep has always claimed you since your very first night in this city, 3 long years and a whole different version of yourself ago. On quiet evenings, once the shop is shuttered and the day's accounts are settled, and what has already gone up to the attic to sleep the deep, dreamless sleep of a boy still young enough to be exhausted by nothing more complicated than an ordinary day's work, you sometimes sit by the back window for a little while before following him up, watching the last of the light drain out of the narrow strip of sky visible between the roof lines. The street outside settles into its evening rhythm without much encouragement from anyone. A lamplighter makes his rounds, though his small flames do little more than mark the worst corners rather than truly banish the dark. Candlelight appears in windows up and down the row, one after another, like the street slowly closing its eyes. Somewhere nearby, a fiddle starts up. Badly, the player clearly more enthusiastic than skilled. And somewhere further off, a watchman's bell tolls an hour you've stopped bothering to count precisely, because the precise number matters less, most nights, than the simple fact of another day successfully completed. Mistress Pelham, on the evening she joins you for a few quiet minutes before retiring, has a habit of asking after your day in a way that's gentler than her husband's brisk inquiries, more curious than dutiful. She listens properly to your answers, the way Webb listened, the way the old fisherman on the hill listened, and you've come to understand that this particular kind of attention, unhurried, genuinely interested, is rarer and more valuable than you once realized, back when you assumed every adult's questions were simply a formality to be answered as briefly as politeness allowed. You've a steady way with the customers now, she told you once, not long after your third year began. I watched you with that difficult woman who came in complaining the lemons weren't fresh enough, when anyone could see they were perfectly good. You didn't argue with her. You just let her feel heard, and then you sold her exactly what she came in to buy anyway. Is that a skill, mistress? It's the whole of the trade, more than the fruit itself, I sometimes think. People don't just buy lemons from us, Robert. They buy the feeling of being looked after. Remember that, whatever shop you end up running yourself one day. You do remember it. It settles alongside Webb's words about truths nobody's fully explained, alongside the fisherman's words about lines a man learns where to draw, alongside Tom Avery's words about faith found wherever a man can manage to find it. A small private collection of wisdom gathered from people who owed you nothing and gave it anyway, simply because something in each of them recognized something worth speaking to in you. After Mistress Pelham retires, you usually have an hour or so to yourself before exhaustion finally claims you properly. Sometimes you spend it mending a tear in your one good shirt, your stitches slow and uneven but steadily improving with practice, the same way your judgment of a lemon's ripeness improved with patient repetition. Sometimes you simply sit, listening to the city settle around you, thinking about the strange, particular shape your life has taken since that first, terrifying morning, hauling crates up out of the Margaret Rose's hold. You think, on nights like this, about all the people this trade has put in your path. People you'd never have met if you'd stayed in Maidstone tending your father's small orchard of apple trees that never produced anything half so valuable or half so dangerous as a single crate of Spanish lemons. You think about Captain Hollis, who has crossed an ocean and back more times than he can probably count precisely, and who still, after all those crossings, watches the weather with the same wary respect as a man who's never once allowed himself to grow complacent about what the sea is capable of doing to a ship and everyone aboard her. You think about Tom Avery, the young sailor with the scarred eyebrow, who keeps faith with a sour little fruit because he watched a friend die for the lack of it, and who you sometimes see still, on the rare occasions the Margaret Rose makes port and her crew has leave to wander the docks, always greeting you with the particular warmth of a man who remembers exactly what your trade has meant to people he's loved. You think about Mistress Allard in the Gresham kitchen, sharp-eyed and competent, who told you to soak your hands in salt water and meant it kindly, and who still on every delivery finds some small piece of practical wisdom to offer you alongside her usual brisk inspection of the goods. You think about Apothecary Webb, stooped over his jars and bundles, who told you that some of the most important truths in the world arrive long before anyone's worked out the reasons behind them, and who you suspect, though he'd never say so directly, has come to genuinely look forward to your weekly deliveries as much for the brief conversation as for the trade itself. You think about the old fisherman on the hill, mending his net with patient, unhurried hands, who told you that nothing saved is worth as much as the saving of yourself, and who you never saw again after that single Sunday afternoon, though his words have stayed with you more durably than almost anything else anyone has told you in 3 years. You think about the thief at the broken window, whose name you learned only after the fact, who decided in a single frozen second that a fire wasn't worth dying for, and who is, you assume, somewhere now paying whatever price the magistrate's court eventually settled on him. Transportation, most likely, given what Cutter told you, a sentence that will carry him to some distant colony, where he'll spend years labouring under conditions you can only imagine, all for the sake of a crate of fruit he never managed to actually steal. You don't feel triumphant thinking about him even now. You mostly feel the same tired, complicated sorrow you felt on the night Cutter first brought the news. The sense that the city grinds down thieves and honest men both, in its own different ways, and that justice, when it finally arrives, rarely feels as clean or as satisfying as the stories make it sound. You think about Edward, the sailor who died somewhere in the middle of an ocean you'll never personally cross, his teeth loosening one by one in a slow horror that no amount of careful packing or quick hands back in London could have prevented, because by the time anyone realised the voyage would run that long, it was already too late to do anything except watch and hope and eventually grieve. You carry all of them with you now, in some quiet way, not as ghosts exactly, more as a kind of accumulated weight that gives your work a seriousness it didn't have in your first terrified weeks, back when a lemon was simply a strange fruit you didn't understand, and a rope burn was simply a pain you didn't yet know how to absorb without flinching. This city, you've come to understand, contains every single one of these people simultaneously, every single day. The merchants at the customs house calculating fortunes that dwarf anything Master Pelham will ever see. The thieves working the dark margins of the same trade that feeds those fortunes. The physicians prescribing fruit they can't fully explain. The sailors trusting that prescription with their lives, because the alternative is trusting nothing at all. The mothers in fine houses worrying over their bleeding gums, and the mothers in poor houses who'll never afford a single lemon in their entire lives, suffering the same affliction without ever learning its name properly. It grinds some people down to nothing, this city, and it lifts others toward fortunes they could never have imagined arriving anywhere else. The difference between those two outcomes seems to come down, as far as you can tell after 3 years of close observation, to some combination of luck and connection, and simply being in the right place, on the right ship, in the right master's shop, standing at the right window when a fire breaks out and deciding, in your own single frozen second, that some things are worth risking yourself for and some aren't. You've been lucky, you think, settling back against the cool plaster wall as the candle on the windowsill burns lower. A fair master, a trade that's taught you something true about the world, even if you can't always say precisely what that truth is. Your health intact, despite the fire, despite the storm, despite 3 years of rope and lye soap and constant low-grade danger that you've mostly stopped noticing as danger, because it's simply become the shape of your ordinary days. Not everyone in this city can say the same. You think of beggars you pass without a second glance most mornings now, men missing fingers or whole hands to accidents on the docks, women whose faces carry the particular hollow exhaustion of someone who hasn't eaten properly in longer than they'd care to admit. You think of the gin shops that never seem to close, even on the coldest nights, their doorways exhaling warm, sour-smelling air toward anyone desperate enough to want what's sold inside. Tomorrow there will be more customers, more crates to sort, more negotiations to win or occasionally lose, more lemons dying their slow, sweet, inevitable death in straw-lined baskets, while you do your best to slow the process by however many hours your skill can manage. The same as today, the same as yesterday, the same as all the days stretching out ahead of you, however many of them eventually add up into the shop of your own that Master Pelham has started lately to speak of as something more certain than aspiration. But tonight, you're simply tired, in the good, clean way that comes from a day honestly spent, and the candle is burning low, and somewhere above you, what is sleeping soundly in the attic room you'll soon be climbing up to join him in. You blow out the candle. The room goes dark around you, soft and complete, and you sit there a moment longer in that darkness, listening to the city's faint ongoing murmur through the floorboards, before finally rising to climb the stairs towards sleep. The largest single-order Master Pelham shop has ever filled arrives in your fourth spring, in the form of a steward from a household grander even than the Greshams, sent to commission lemons enough for a banquet, marking a great marriage alliance between two families whose names you recognise only distantly from the kind of gossip that drifts down even to apprentices who'll never set foot inside such houses themselves. 600, the steward says, laying out the order with the brisk indifference of a man who's clearly never once in his life worried about where 600 lemons might come from, or how many ships and storms and dockside fires stood between an orchard in Spain and his master's banquet table. The finest you can source. My lord will not have it said his daughter's wedding feast was served with inferior fruit. Master Pelham's face, behind its careful tradesman's neutrality, performs a brief private calculation that you've learned to recognise. The look of a man working out, in the space of a few heartbeats, exactly how much profit and exactly how much risk a single order represents. 600 my lord's steward will have, he says, within the fortnight if the tide and the weather cooperate, which I cannot promise on behalf of either. It takes every available lemon from 2 incoming shipments, careful negotiation with a second fruiterer further along the docks to cover the shortfall, and 4 solid days of sorting, grading, and repacking to assemble an order of that size without including a single fruit that might embarrass the shop's reputation. You spend those 4 days with your hands almost permanently stained faintly yellow from citrus oil, your nose so thoroughly saturated with the smell that you stop registering it as anything except the ordinary air of your own existence. The delivery itself on the appointed morning requires 2 carts instead of 1, and Master Pelham, uncharacteristically nervous about a transaction this size, insists on accompanying both personally, leaving you and Watt to manage the second cart's loading while he rides ahead with the first, determined to oversee the steward's inspection himself, rather than trust it to an apprentice, however capable. The route to the great house cuts through the heart of the city at an hour when the streets are at their most crowded, and you and Watt find yourselves navigating a press of carts, pedestrians, and livestock that makes even Billingsgate's chaos seem orderly by comparison. A procession of some kind is forming up several streets over. You catch fragments of conversation suggesting a foreign ambassador's retinue is passing through on its way to present credentials at court, and the crowds gathering to watch the spectacle have spilled across half the available roadway, forcing your cart into a series of frustrating detours. It's at the worst possible moment, squeezed into a narrow lane with barely room for the cart to pass and a wall of spectators pressed close on either side, that disaster nearly finds you. A pack horse further up the lane, startled by something. A dog, a sudden shout, you never learn exactly what, rears hard enough to snap its lead from the careless grip of the boy minding it, and bolts directly toward you, eyes wild, hooves striking sparks against the cobbles, scattering spectators in every direction, with the particular pure panic that a runaway animal always produces in a crowd. "What the donkey!" you shout, already throwing your own weight against your cart's lead rope. hauling your own beast sideways toward the relative safety of a recessed doorway, your heart slamming against your ribs as the panicked horse closes the distance with terrifying speed. What freezes for one fatal half-second, exactly the wrong response, exactly the response you remember freezing into yourself on your very first morning at the docks, and you lunge across the narrow gap between you, grab his collar, and haul him bodily backward against the wall just as the horse thunders past close enough that you feel the wind of its passing against your face, close enough to smell the hot sweat and fear smell of the animal itself, close enough that a single misjudged half-second either way would have ended very differently for both of you. The horse careens onward, eventually brought under control some way further down the lane by quicker hands than yours, leaving behind it a trail of spilled goods, overturned baskets, and shaken spectators slowly picking themselves up off the cobbles and out of doorways. Your own cart has survived intact, the donkey skittish but unharmed, the crates of lemons undisturbed in their careful straw packing. What is shaking against the wall beside you, his face gone properly white, his breath coming in short, frightened gasps. You're all right, you tell him, gripping his shoulder the way you wish someone had gripped yours on your own first terrified morning. You're all right. Breathe. It's past now. I froze, he says, his voice small and ashamed. I just froze. I didn't move at all. I could have. Everyone freezes the first time something like that happens, you say, and you find, saying it, that you mean it completely, without the slightest performance of comfort about it. I froze worse than that. My first year, watching a crate nearly take my own head off on a hoist line. The freezing isn't the failure, what? The failure is freezing every time forever, and never learning to move past it. You'll move faster next time, I promise you that, because it's exactly what happened to me. He nods, not entirely convinced yet, but steadied enough to push himself off the wall and help you straighten the cart's load where the sudden halt has shifted it slightly out of true. An old woman who'd been standing near the doorway you'd both pressed yourselves against, watching the whole episode with the calm detachment of someone who's witnessed considerably worse in her time, speaks up as you're resettling the crates. You did right by the boy, she says, nodding toward you with what might be approval. Plenty of older lads would have saved themselves first and left the young one to whatever came. You didn't. That's worth something in a city that doesn't always reward it. He's my responsibility, you say, somewhat awkwardly, unused to being praised by strangers for something that felt in the moment less like a noble choice and more like simple instinct. Most things worth doing feel like instinct once you've practiced them enough, she says, and there's something in the dry amusement of her tone that reminds you, briefly and pleasantly, of the old fisherman on the hill. You'll make a good master yourself some day, lad, if you keep choosing the boy over the cargo every time it matters. She moves off into the thinning crowd before you can think of any proper reply, and you're left standing beside your steadied cart, your own heart still not fully settled from the near miss, turning her words over the way you've learned to turn over every scrap of unexpected wisdom this city occasionally hands you. You and Watt deliver the second cart's load without further incident, arriving at the great house's side gate not long after Master Pelham's first delivery, and the steward, a man with the permanently unimpressed expression of someone who has clearly inspected far too many tradesmen's deliveries to be easily satisfied, runs his thumb along the rind of a dozen separate lemons before finally, grudgingly, pronouncing the whole consignment acceptable. Master Pelham's relief, once the final payment is counted and the empty carts turned back toward home, is visible in the way his shoulders drop several inches all at once, the tension of 4 days' careful preparation and a morning's nervous oversight finally permitted to ease. 600 lemons, he says, mostly to himself, as the cart rattles back through streets considerably emptier now that the ambassador's procession has long since passed. I've never moved that volume in a single order in 30 years of this trade. Your grandchildren will hear about this delivery, Robert, if you ever have grandchildren disposed to listen to an old fruiterer's stories. You think, riding home with the empty crates rattling behind you, and Wat dozing against your shoulder despite the cart's jolting about grandchildren you don't yet have, listening to stories about a runaway horse and 600 lemons and a wedding feast you'll never personally witness, and something in the thought settles warmly into your chest alongside all the other small accumulated weights this trade has given you to carry. The winter following the wedding feast order brings the hardest cold you've known since arriving in the city. A deep, bone-aching frost that turns the puddles in the yard solid by sundown and leaves the inside of the shop's front window laced with delicate traceries of ice by morning, fine as lace, melting into long, crooked trails the moment the first customer's breath and the brazier's heat reach them. The Thames itself, in the worst week of that cold, freezes along its margins thick enough to walk on, and word travels fast along the docks that the ice has held solid enough, in places, for a proper frost fair to set up on the river itself. Stalls and braziers and roasting spits arranged on a surface that would, in any ordinary winter, drown anyone foolish enough to trust their weight to it. Master Pelham, who has seen 3 such frosts in his lifetime, and lost a cousin to a cracked patch of ice on the second of them, refuses outright to let you or Wat anywhere near the frozen river, no matter how many other apprentices from neighbouring shops come back with breathless stories of sliding on their boot heels across a surface that creaks and groans beneath them like something half alive. Ice that creaks is ice that's deciding, he says, with the flat, humourless certainty of a man who has buried someone over exactly this kind of decision. I'll not have either of you deciding alongside it. So you watch the frost fair only from the safety of the quay, the 2 of you bundled in every spare layer the household can spare, your breath fogging thick in the freezing air as you observe the strange, carnival spectacle of London's working poor dancing and roasting meat and selling spiced wine across a surface that any other week of the year would simply be the river doing what rivers do. The lemon trade itself nearly stops dead during the worst of that frost. No ship dares attempt the channel crossing in weather cold enough to ice over rigging and turn deck ropes into stiff, unworkable cables, and the stock already in the shop's back room has to be guarded against the cold with the same careful attention it usually receives against the heat. Extra straw packed thick around every crate, a small brazier kept burning through the coldest nights in the back room itself, because a frozen lemon, you've learned this winter, is every bit as ruined as a rotten one. The flesh turning to a watery, useless mush the moment it thaws. You spend those frozen weeks doing the kind of patient, unglamorous maintenance work that never gets mentioned in any story about a trade's excitement, checking the brazier through the night in shift with Wat, mending a cracked crate slat by candlelight, recounting stock that hasn't moved in days, simply because there's little else productive to occupy idle hands, when the whole city's commerce has slowed to match the frozen river's stillness. It teaches you something different than the fire did, or the storm, or the runaway horse. Those taught you what to do when danger arrives suddenly and violently, demanding an instant decision. The frost teaches you something slower and in its own way harder. The discipline of sustained vigilance against a threat that never announces itself with smoke or shouting, that simply waits, patient and silent, for the one night someone forgets to feed the brazier properly. By the time the thaw finally arrives 3 weeks later, with a great cracking and groaning of breaking ice that you can hear from inside the shop, oddly thunderous, like the whole river clearing its throat after a long enforced silence, you've grown into the kind of patience that Master Pelham himself possesses, the quiet, unglamorous competence of someone who understands that most disasters in this trade aren't dramatic at all, but simply the slow accumulation of small neglects. The same way most successes aren't dramatic either, but simply the slow accumulation of small, careful attentions repeated faithfully, night after night, until a whole winter has passed and the stock has survived it. You did well this frost, Master Pelham tells you, once the first ship of the new season finally limps up the thawed river with fresh stock aboard. Better than I did, your first winter here, if I'm honest about it. I lost half a shipment to neglect during a cold spell my second-year apprenticed, because I thought watching a brazier all night was beneath a young man's attention. Cost my own master a sum I spent a year working off. It's the closest he's come to admitting his own apprenticeship held failures alongside its successes, and you tuck the admission away carefully alongside everything else this trade and this city have taught you, understanding more clearly than before that even the steadiest hands you've ever watched work began somewhere just as raw and uncertain as your own. Trouble of a different sort arrives in your 5th year, not from fire or storm or frozen rivers, but from a rival fruiterer named Cobb who keeps a shop 3 streets over and has, for reasons that become clear only slowly, decided that Master Pelham's long-standing arrangement with Captain Hollis represents an opportunity worth disrupting. You first notice something is wrong on an ordinary delivery morning when you arrive at the quay to find Cobb's own apprentice already deep in conversation with one of Hollis's mates, the two of them examining a sample crate with the particular unhurried thoroughness of men negotiating something significant rather than simply passing the time. Cobb's offering better terms, Davy tells you later that same day, having heard it second-hand from a waterman who heard it from someone aboard the Margaret Rose herself. Lower commission on the captain's private cargo allowance, faster payment, no haggling over the rot rate. He's been courting Hollis for the better part of a month by the sound of it. You report this to Master Pelham that evening, expecting alarm, and instead watching him receive the news with a thoughtful stillness that surprises you. Cobb's a younger man than me, he says, turning a lemon over in his hands without really examining it, the gesture more habit than purpose. Hungrier, willing to undercut himself for a season or two to steal a steady customer, the way younger men in this trade always think they can afford to do before they've learned what a steady customer actually costs to keep once you've won them away from someone else. Should we offer better terms too, you ask? Match him? Master Pelham shakes his head slowly. Match a man racing toward the bottom, and you both arrive there together, faster than either of you would alone. No, we don't compete on price with a man willing to lose money to win a contract. We compete on the one thing he can't easily copy. What's that, sir? Trust. 30 years of never once shorting Hollis on account, never once dressing up spoiled fruit as fresh, never once leaving him short on a crossing because we were too greedy to pack the order properly. That's worth more to a captain who's watched men die of scurvy than tuppence saved on commission. Cobb will learn that, eventually, probably at the cost of whatever customers he manages to steal in the meantime. The question is whether Hollis learns it before or after he's already signed with Cobb and regretted it. It's a gamble, and you can see In the careful way Master Pelham continues his ordinary business over the following weeks. No panic, no underpricing, simply the same steady reliability he's always offered, that he's genuinely uncertain which way Hollis will eventually decide. The test comes sooner than either of you expects, when Cobb's own first major shipment for Hollis's crew arrives badly handled. Packed in damp straw by an apprentice cutting corners to save time, a third of it spoiled by the time it reaches the ship, leaving several sailors short of their promised allowance for an upcoming 6-week crossing to the Baltic. You hear about it from Tom Avery himself, who finds you at the quay a few days later with an expression somewhere between amusement and lingering irritation. "Cobb's boy packed our last order like he'd never handled fruit in his life," he says. "Half of it gone soft before we'd even left the channel. The captain's not best pleased. Says he'd rather pay your master's higher commission and know the crate's sound than save a few coins and gamble his crew's teeth on it." You relay this to Master Pelham that evening with something you don't quite manage to keep out of your voice. Not quite triumph, but close to it. "Don't gloat," he says, though his own mouth has curved into something close to a satisfied smile despite his words. "Cobb will learn his lesson, or he won't, and either way it's no business of ours to celebrate another tradesman's misfortune too loudly. We simply keep doing what we've always done. That's the whole of the lesson, Robert, if you want one to carry forward into whatever shop you run yourself one day. You don't need to outrun every rival who tries to undercut you. You only need to still be standing, solid and reliable, exactly where your customers know to find you, once the rival's shortcuts have finally caught up with him." Hollis renews his arrangement with Pelham's shop within the month, on the same terms as before, with no further mention of Cobb's offer, and you watch the whole episode settle into the shop's accumulated history, alongside the fire and the storm and the wedding feast order. One more proof, gathered patiently over years, that this trade rewards a particular kind of slow, unglamorous integrity more reliably in the end than it rewards cleverness or speed. Cobb's shop, you hear eventually, struggles through the following 2 years before finally closing altogether. The apprentice who packed that ruinous shipment having moved on to other work entirely, and Cobb himself taking a position as a journeyman in someone else's establishment, his own ambitions for independence quietly shelved. You don't feel triumphant about that either, in the end, any more than you felt triumphant about the thief who tried to rob the shop years before. You simply feel, turning the whole episode over in your mind on a quiet evening much later, that you've learned something true about how trust accumulates and spends itself in a city built on transactions between people who mostly never see each other's faces beyond a single delivery. Every honest crate a small deposit into an account that compounds, slowly, into something sturdier than any single season's cleverness could ever build. It's not a lesson anyone could have taught you in a single sitting, the way Webb taught you about scurvy or the old fisherman taught you about lines worth drawing. It's the kind of lesson that only arrives properly through years of watching it prove itself true, transaction after transaction, season after season, until one day you simply realize you've absorbed it completely, the way your hands absorb the skill of judging a lemon's ripeness blind, without ever quite being able to point to the single moment the learning was finished. There is one more morning worth telling you about before this story lets you rest, because it's the morning that taught you, more plainly than any fire or storm ever managed, exactly how far you'd travelled from the boy who once flinched at every shout in Billingsgate. It comes in your 6th year, on an ordinary Tuesday that gives no warning at all of becoming memorable, when Master Pelham takes ill with a fever sudden and fierce enough that Mistress Pelham sends for the physician before breakfast and forbids him, in a tone that brooks no argument even from her own husband, to leave his bed for any reason whatsoever, which leaves you, for the first time in 6 years, entirely in charge of the shop. There's no grand ceremony to it. Mistress Pelham simply hands you the keys to the strong box, the morning's outstanding orders written in Master Pelham's careful hand, and a look that combines worry for her husband with a clear, steady confidence in you that settles something nervous in your chest, even as your stomach tightens with the weight of sudden responsibility. "You know the trade as well as he does," she says. "Better, in some particulars, if I'm honest. Since you've kept up with the newer suppliers, he's grown too set in his ways to bother courting. Run it as you would your own shop, Robert, because in every way that matters today, it is your own shop for as many days as the fever keeps him abed." You open the shutters that morning with hands that are, you notice with some surprise, perfectly steady. No tremor, no hesitation, simply the practiced motion of 6 years' repetition. You greet the first customer of the day, an elderly woman who's bought from this shop longer than you've been alive. With the easy familiarity Mistress Pelham taught you matters more than the fruit itself, and you negotiate the day's deliveries, settle the accounts, and grade an incoming shipment for quality entirely on your own judgment, with no older hand standing ready to correct you if you err. You don't err. Not seriously, not in any way that cost the shop money or reputation. A small dispute with a supplier over a short count resolves itself in your favour through patient, unhurried questioning rather than the heated argument the supplier clearly expected from a boy running the shop alone. A delivery to the Gresham's kitchen goes smoothly, Mistress Allard greeting you with the same brisk warmth she's always shown, asking after Master Pelham's health with what sounds like genuine concern before moving briskly on to inspecting the fruit with her usual thoroughness. By the time you close the shutters that evening, count the day's takings twice the way you've watched Master Pelham do 1,000 times, and climb the stairs to report the day's business to Mistress Pelham at her husband's bedside, you understand, with a clarity that surprises you in its completeness. That the shop you've been dreaming about for years, your own sign, your own door, your own apprentices learning the trade under your patient instruction, isn't some distant, unreachable thing anymore. It's already, in every way that matters, sitting inside your own too capable hands. Master Pelham recovers within the week, his fever breaking on the 5th night, and he returns to the shop floor, still pale and somewhat unsteady, but recovering well enough to resume his place behind the counter within another fortnight. He never makes any great speech about the week you spent running everything alone. He simply nods once, examining the careful accounts you kept in his absence, and says, in the gruff way that you've learned over 6 years, means considerably more than its plain words suggest. Good. You'll do well enough on your own when the time comes. It's the closest thing to a blessing you'll ever receive from him, and it's enough. More than enough, really, settling into you alongside every other small accumulated proof this trade and this city have offered across 6 long years that the frightened boy who once flinched at every loud voice in this city's markets has become, slowly and almost without his own full notice, someone capable of standing steady at the centre of his own small, hard-won corner of the world. There are smaller moments too, scattered across those same 6 years, that don't fit neatly into any single dramatic episode, but that have, in their quiet accumulation, shaped you just as thoroughly as the fire or the storm ever did. There's the morning a customer's small daughter, no older than 5, reaches up on her toes to peer over the counter at the basket of lemons, her eyes wide with the particular wonder children reserve for things they've never seen before, and asks you, in a small, serious voice, whether the fruit is truly as sour as her mother claims. Sourer, you tell her, crouching to her eye level, the way Mistress Allard once showed you puts nervous customers at ease. Sour enough to make your whole face screw up like a dried apple if you bit straight into one. She considers this with the gravity of a magistrate weighing evidence, then declares, with sudden and absolute conviction, that she intends to try it anyway, and her mother laughs and buys a single lemon just to let her daughter test the claim against her own face, right there in the shop, to the considerable amusement of every other customer present that morning. There's the rainy autumn afternoon you spend nearly an hour helping an elderly sailor, retired now and walking with a cane, locate the precise shade and firmness of lemon his late wife always insisted on for her preserves, a search that yields no profit worth mentioning, but that leaves the old man's eyes wet with something other than the rain by the time he finally finds, among your baskets, a fruit that matches his decades-old memory closely enough to satisfy him. There's the morning you catch Watt, grown taller now and nearly through his own first year, quietly correcting a younger boy from a neighbouring shop on the proper way to test a lemon's ripeness without looking. The exact words and exact patient tone you once used with him now passing forward, unbidden, into someone else's training. The trade's small accumulated wisdom continuing to move from hand to hand the way it always has, the way it presumably always will. None of these moments would survive on their own as a story worth telling around a tavern table, but stacked together, season after season, delivery after delivery, they form the actual substance of the life you've built here, not the fires and storms that test a person's nerve in a single violent hour, but the 1,000 small honest transactions that test, instead, a person's patience and character across years nobody else will ever fully witness or properly count. You've come to suspect, turning all of this over during the quiet hours before sleep, that this is true of most lives worth living, whatever trade or century a person happens to find themselves born into. The dramatic nights make for better stories, but the small mornings, repeated faithfully enough times, are what actually build a person into whoever they eventually become. Davy, by then a master in his own modest right with a shop of his own near the bridge, stops by every few months to compare notes on suppliers and prices, the two of you trading the particular gossip that only fellow tradesmen in the same hard business ever bother sharing with each other. And on one such visit he tells you, almost in passing, that he still thinks sometimes about that very first morning hauling crates out of the Margaret Rose, the rope burning both your palms raw, before either of you had any real idea what the trade would eventually demand of you. Feels like another life, he says, turning a lemon over in his hand the way every person in this trade eventually learns to do without conscious thought. Funny what sticks with a man. Not the big disasters half the time, just the ordinary mornings that turned out, looking back, to be the start of everything. You think he's right about that. More right than he probably knows. The ordinary mornings are the ones that built you, in the end, far more thoroughly than any single dramatic night ever could on its own. Watt, for his part, finishes his own apprenticeship 2 years behind you, by which time he's grown into a steady, capable young man who no longer flinches at runaway horses or sudden loud voices in the market, who tests a lemon's ripeness blind with the same unhurried confidence you once envied in Master Pelham himself. He takes a position as a journeyman with a fruiterer near the bridge, not far from Davy's own shop, and the three of you fall into the easy habit of meeting occasionally to share the kind of stories that only men in the same demanding trade can properly appreciate. You notice, watching Watt work on one such visit, sorting a crate of fruit with quick, sure hands, that you can no longer quite locate the frightened boy who once lay awake beside you in the attic, too overwhelmed by the city's noise and strangeness to sleep. The city absorbed him too in its own time, the way it absorbed you, the way it has apparently absorbed every apprentice who's ever crossed its bridges and learned, slowly, to call its crowded streets something close to home. You think, on quiet evenings like these, about how strange it is that a single piece of fruit, small, sour, prone to dying within weeks of leaving its tree, could end up threading itself so thoroughly through the whole shape of your one particular life, through fire and frost and storm, through a runaway horse and a rival's failed ambition, through a fever that handed you for one telling week the full weight and full reward of running a trade entirely on your own two hands. You never set out, leaving Maidstone with your 4 shillings and your letter of introduction, to become a man who understands lemons better than almost anything else in the world. But the city rarely asks a person what they set out to become. It simply hands them a trade, a master, a rope to haul, and waits, patiently, to see what kind of person eventually emerges from all that hauling. You think of all of it now, lying here, and find that the thinking itself has become a kind of gentle rehearsal for sleep, the way counting sheep might work for someone else, except your sheep are crates and storms and steady hands, and a city that has, slowly, become something closer to home than the orchard you once knew as the whole of the world. That night, after the cart is finally unloaded and the donkey stabled, and Master Pelham has retired upstairs still muttering happily about 600 lemons and grandchildren who don't yet exist, you climb the narrow stairs to the attic room you share with Wet, your whole body carrying the particular heaviness that comes after a day stretched taut, with both danger and triumph in roughly equal measure. What is already curled on his side of the straw mattress, his breathing slow and even, the deep untroubled sleep of a boy who's frightened himself badly enough today to be thoroughly exhausted by the fear alone. You lie down beside him without bothering to undress, the way you've done at the end of nearly every hard day for 4 years now, and you stare up at the low ceiling, listening to the city settle into its nighttime rhythms below the floorboards. The candle on the windowsill throws a small, steady light across the room, and you watch it for a while without really seeing it, your mind drifting back over the day the way it always does in these last few minutes before sleep finally claims you. The horse, the wild scramble against the wall, the old woman's quiet approval, the steward's grudging acceptance, Master Pelham's loosened shoulders on the ride home. It's strange. The person you've become since that first terrified morning hauling crates out of the Margaret Rose's hold. Not the boy from Maidstone anymore, not quite, though traces of him remain. In the way you still flinch, very slightly, at the smell of burning straw, a reflex 4 years hasn't fully erased. Not entirely a Londoner either, not in the way Master Pelham or Mistress Allard are. Born to this city's rhythms the way you were born to apple orchards and quiet village lanes. Something in between. Something the city has been patiently shaping out of you. One rope burn and one storm watch and one rescued boy at a time. The way slow, careful packing shapes which lemons survive a crossing and which ones don't. Your mother, if she saw you now, would barely recognize the way you talk. London's particular cadence and slang having crept into your speech somewhere along the way without your ever quite noticing the change happening. She'd probably comment on your hands, calloused and citrus-stained, and entirely unlike the soft hands of the boy she sent away with 4 shillings sewn into his coat lining. She'd be proud, you think, in the quiet way your parents have always been proud, more comfortable showing it in small practical gestures than in words. They sent you here with nothing but hope and a letter of introduction, and so far, slowly, unevenly, through fire and storm and runaway horses and 600 lemons destined for a wedding feast, that hope has been paying off, fraction by fraction, the way most worthwhile things pay off, not in a single dramatic moment, but in the slow accumulation of 1,000 small moments nobody else will ever know to count. The candle gutters slightly, its flame bending in some draught you can't locate, and you watch the shadows on the ceiling shift and resettle. You think about the years still ahead, the ones you can't yet properly imagine, the remaining time of your apprenticeship, however much of it remains, the journeyman years after that, saving carefully, learning everything Master Pelham still has left to teach you about negotiation and timing, and the particular patience this trade demands of anyone who hopes to survive it long term. And somewhere beyond all of that, indistinct but no longer entirely impossible, the shop of your own that Master Pelham speaks of now, with something approaching certainty rather than mere encouragement. Your own sign creaking on its hinges above your own door, your own apprentices some day sleeping in some attic room not unlike this one, learning to test a lemon's ripeness blind, by feel alone, the way your own hands learned it. Will you still be in this city then, older, your own hands calloused in the particular pattern this trade leaves on everyone who practices it long enough? Will the shop survive the storms and fires and runaway horses that this city seems endlessly willing to throw at anyone trying to build something lasting within its walls? You can't know, not really. Nobody can know such things in advance, any more than Master Pelham could have known, standing at the water's edge during that autumn gale, whether the Margaret Rose would limp into port or vanish beneath the waves, with 3 years of careful saving riding in her hold. But you find, lying here in the candlelight with Watts slow breathing beside you, and the city murmuring faintly through the floorboards, that the not knowing doesn't frighten you the way it once would have. You've learned, across 4 years of rope burns and rot, and rescued boys and storms survived by inches, that you can handle a great deal more than you ever suspected you could, back when you first stepped off that cart from Maidstone and flinched at every loud voice in the market. The boy who flinched is still somewhere inside you. You can feel him sometimes in moments of sudden danger, in the half-second before instinct takes over and carries you forward into action, rather than away from it. But he's not the one in charge anymore. Someone else has taken that role gradually, almost without your noticing the transfer happening. Someone who knows how to navigate a panicked crowd, how to read a storm-coloured sky, how to grip a frightened boy's collar and pull him to safety without a single moment's hesitation, because some part of you has finally, fully understood that a person is always worth more than the cargo, however precious that cargo might be. You think of Master Pelham's words from the night of the fire, the closest thing to tenderness he's ever shown you, repeated now in your memory with the particular clarity that exhaustion sometimes lends to important things. A boy is worth more than a crate of lemons, whatever else you might think tonight. You understand those words better now than you did standing in the smoke-filled doorway, your body already moving toward danger before your mind had finished deciding whether that movement made any sense at all. You are warm enough, here in this narrow attic bed. Fed enough, after a hard day's labour properly compensated with supper and the quiet satisfaction of work well done. Safe enough, for tonight at least, with the shop's doors bolted below, and Master Pelham's steady snoring presence one floor up, and what small trusting weight settled beside you in sleep. You have a roof over your head that survived a fire and a storm both, and a trade that matters in ways you're still discovering, and people scattered across this enormous city who are counting on you, in their various ways, to show up again tomorrow and do it all again. Master Pelham counting on your steady hands, Watt counting on your patient teaching, Webb counting on your weekly delivery of soft fruit for his tinctures, Mistress Allard counting on your honest grading of quality, Captain Hollis and Tom Avery and all the sailors who'll never know your name personally, but who'll carry your careful work with them across oceans you'll never personally cross, trusting a sour little fruit to keep their teeth in their heads and their strength in their limbs. That's more than a great many people in this city can honestly say for themselves. That's enough. That's more than enough, really, when you let yourself sit with it properly instead of rushing past it toward tomorrow's next task, the way the city's relentless pace usually encourages. The sounds of London grow fainter around you, or perhaps you're simply listening less attentively now. The boundary between waking thought and the soft, drifting edge of sleep beginning to blur the way it always does when a body has earned its rest as thoroughly as yours has tonight. Somewhere out there, beyond these walls, the city continues exactly as it always does, indifferent to any single sleeper's exhaustion. The night watch makes its rounds, calling hours into the dark. The gin shops, wherever they are tonight, serve whatever desperate souls still have coin enough to forget their troubles for an hour. The watermen tie up their boats along the quiet river and count out whatever the day's fares amounted to. The merchants in their grand houses sleep behind walls thick enough to keep out the noise and the smell, dreaming perhaps of fortunes still to be made. The beggars in doorways huddle deeper into whatever rags they have, dreaming perhaps of nothing more ambitious than warmth. And you, Robert Tanner, apprentice fruiterer, boy from Maidstone, slowly and unevenly becoming something else entirely, dreamer of futures you can't yet properly name, lying here in a narrow attic bed with the day's last small triumphs and small fears finally settling into something like peace. You sink, gently, into the darkness gathering at the edges of your thoughts. Tomorrow will bring more customers, more crates to sort, more careful negotiations, more lemons quietly dying their slow, sweet, inevitable death in baskets lined with fresh straw, while your trained hands do their patient best to slow the process by however many hours skill and care can manage. Tomorrow will bring more of everything that's filled your days for 4 years now. The rhythm so deeply settled into your bones that you barely notice anymore where the labour ends and your own identity begins. But that's tomorrow's burden to carry. Right now, there's only this, the softness of sleep finally reaching up to claim you properly, the quiet of the attic room settling around you like a blanket, the steady, undisturbed breathing of the boy sleeping safely beside you because you reached across a narrow gap today and chose him over everything else that mattered. You close your eyes. The last thing you hear, faint and distant, is a church bell somewhere across the rooftops marking an hour you're far too tired to count properly. Somewhere beneath that single fading note, the river continues its endless patient work, the same as it has for centuries before you arrived, and will continue long after every person you've met in this story has gone the way of all flesh. Master Pelham, Mistress Pelham, Wat grown old himself by then, Webb and his crowded shelves of jars, Captain Hollis and his storm-battered ship, the old fisherman on the hill with his patient mending hands. Centuries will pass beyond anything you can properly imagine from inside this narrow attic bed. The city you know, this loud, dangerous, generous, indifferent sprawl of streets and wharves and crowded markets, will change beyond all recognition. The wooden quays you've hauled crates across will be rebuilt in stone, then rebuilt again in materials nobody alive tonight could begin to picture. The ships that struggle against autumn gales for days at a time will be replaced by vessels that cross oceans in a fraction of the time, carrying cargoes that make 600 lemons for a single banquet look like the smallest of small transactions. The disease that's haunted every sailor's voyage since before anyone can remember, the slow horror of bleeding gums and loosening teeth, will eventually be properly understood, its cause finally named and explained in ways that would have astonished even careful, evidence-trusting men like Webb and Dr. Aldous, men who believed in what they couldn't yet fully explain. But somewhere in all that vast, unimaginable change, people will still wake before dawn to labour that exhausts their bodies and teaches them, slowly and expensively, what actually matters. People will still apprentice themselves to trades they don't yet understand, learning patience and judgment one small failure at a time. People will still freeze the first time real danger finds them, and learn, gradually, to move past the freezing. People will still reach across narrow gaps to pull someone else to safety, instinct outrunning thought, because something essential in how a person is built simply will not allow them to do otherwise once they've learned, properly, what matters and what doesn't. Some things don't change, whatever else the centuries rearrange around them. The particular ache of a body that's worked hard and well all day doesn't change. The particular comfort of a roof that held against fire and storm both doesn't change. The need for rest at the close of a long, honestly spent day, that doesn't change either. Not for apprentice fruiterers 4 centuries gone, not for whoever might be listening to this story now, wherever and whenever you happen to be, carrying your own day's particular weight of small triumphs and small fears toward whatever rest you've earned tonight, so let it come. Let sleep take you the way it took Robert Tanner in his attic room on Thames Street, all those centuries ago, after a day that nearly cost him everything, and gave him, instead, a boy safely pulled from a runaway horse's path, and an old woman's quiet, unexpected approval, and a shop's worth of grudging steward's acceptance, and 600 lemons safely delivered against every storm and fire and thief that this enormous, indifferent, generous city threw in their path along the way. Let the noise of your own day fade, the way the city's noise fades now around this single sleeping boy in his narrow attic bed. Let your thoughts slow and soften and settle, the way a candle's flame settles into stillness once the last draught has finally died away. Let your shoulders unclench from whatever they've been carrying since this morning, the way Robert's shoulders unclenched the moment he understood the cargo was simply not worth more than the boy beside him, the way Master Pelham's shoulders dropped the moment 600 lemons were finally, safely, gratefully accepted. You've earned this rest, whoever you are, wherever you're listening from. Whatever your own day's storms and fires and runaway horses happen to be, you carried yourself through them. the same as every tired apprentice in every century has somehow managed to carry themselves through, one rope burn and one small rescue at a time. Take it, and dream, if dreams come to find you tonight, of orchards somewhere warm and sun-soaked and entirely free of rot, of ships that always make port safely, of fires that never quite catch, of every small fierce love that ever reached across a narrow gap to pull someone back from danger, simply because some part of them understood, instantly and completely, exactly what mattered most. Good night.